I found fresh food wrappers in a room that had been empty for 3 days, and that's when I knew someone was living in our dorm illegally. This was back when I was working night security at my college in Oregon, winter break, the whole place half asleep. Most of the building was dark, and it was just me and my partner David doing rounds and pretending the old pipes were the ones making the noises, even though you could tell when something was different. The wrappers were from a cheap deli across the street, and the timestamp was from that afternoon, which was already off, because the resident had signed out on Wednesday. I picked up the crinkled plastic with a pen, looked around the room, bed made, desk cleared, window latched, then opened the closet and saw a flattened cardboard box laid like a mat. It wasn't dramatic, but it was wrong. I logged it, locked the door, and told myself I'd come back with the master later, but already the feeling had that sticky edge, like when you realize a door you're sure you locked is open a hair, and now your brain won't let it go. Around 3 a.m., the building started doing that steady squeak from the basement. Not random, rhythmic. It was just long enough between squeaks to make you think it was over, and then there it was again, slow and deliberate, like someone testing a door and letting it almost settle before nudging it again. I'd been here a month already, and that metal door to the laundry room never did that. I remember standing at the top of the basement stairs, hand on the rail, listening like an idiot before I remembered my flashlight. I radioed David, no response, then heard the squeak again, and it lined up with a soft thump that definitely wasn't pipes. David was at the front desk with his headphones on, hoodie up, eyes on a movie on his phone. I waved a hand and he jumped, pulled one ear cup back. "What?" I told him. "Basement door's doing something. Did you let anyone in?" He shook his head. "No sign-ins. Quiet since 10. He tapped the logbook and spun it around. Last entry, 10:02 p.m. Third floor kid signing out with a suitcase. "Could have come back through an exit," I said. "Or never left," he said without looking up, which was exactly the thing I didn't want to think about. I went down. The laundry door was moving, actually moving, opening an inch or two, then easing shut, like a hand on the edge from the other side just flexing. The automatic closer had been busted for weeks. The door just sat where you left it, so something was pushing it. I stood against the wall so I'd be off to the hinge side and nudged it with my shoe. Inside, the lights were on even though I'd turned them off earlier. One washing machine was running on cold, brand new cycle, and there were wet clothes on the floor like someone had yanked them in a hurry. Hoodie, socks, a cheap t-shirt with a local band logo. I listened for breathing. Nothing. I checked behind the dryer bank and the folding counter. A small puddle near the drain. I crouched, touched it, felt the cool, smelled detergent. Fresh. I backed out, killed the lights, then relit them just to be sure no one flinched. Nothing. Upstairs, David slid his headphones down. "Anything?" I told him about the machine and the clothes. "Anyone scan their card?" He shook his head. "No entries. Remember, 2 back exits don't ping." He wasn't wrong. Old building, half modernized, 4 total exits. Only 2 had readers that logged. "Run the cameras for the alley?" I asked. He said, "Camera 3's dead again." I told Carl. He massaged his temple and added, "Dude, if it's a returning kid and you violate, we get written up." I nodded, but the wrappers were still in my head, and the broken rhythm of that door had me convinced someone knew our weak spots better than we did. Something was wrong, so I started floor by floor. Quick sweeps, doors, stairwells, vending rooms. 3rd floor quiet, 2nd floor quiet. On the 4th floor, I saw 4C cracked open, barely, like a dime's worth. That room was supposed to be empty. The resident's name was underlined on the break list. No light inside. I stood still because I could hear this soft sound, like papers being shuffled carefully the way you do when you don't want to scrape the edges. I knocked, clear and loud. "Campus security." The sound stopped like it had been cut. I waited. "Hello? Campus security." Nothing. I put my ear near the crack and caught a faint exhale. Could have been my own breath feedbacking in my head, but I don't think so. I went down and told David, "4C's cracked. I think someone's in there." He frowned, looked at the break list, then at the binder where we keep maintenance notes. "We logged that the heat actuator in 4C sticks sometimes. Could be expansion," he said, but his voice didn't match the words. I asked for the master key card. He hesitated. "If it's the resident back early and we wake her up, I get yelled at." I said, "The wrappers are from today." He swore under his breath, unlocked the drawer, and handed me the card. "If they complain, I'm writing followed policy in the log. You announce loud, you wait, then you open." "Give me 2 minutes," I said. He nodded and slid his headphones back like he wished he hadn't. I took the stairs 2 at a time. The hallway was empty except for that door and the little metal kickplate glinting. New detail. The door was fully closed now. I stood off to the hinge side, said, "Campus security, entering." Nice and clear. Then slid the card. The light turned green. I waited a beat, listening, and didn't catch anything except my own breathing and the faint hum of the hall vents. I pushed the handle down, cracked the door, and reached in to find the switch without crossing the threshold. My fingers found the plastic toggle. I flicked on the lights to find the room apparently empty. But the desk was covered with scattered textbooks and notebooks, even though students were supposed to clear everything before break, and not just a couple either. It looked like someone had rifled through them and left them in a rush. In the trash can there were fresh deli wrappers and an empty water bottle with condensation rings under it that definitely hadn't been there during my earlier rounds. The bed was unmade, sheets twisted, and there were clear head-shaped dents in the pillow like someone had gotten up recently and didn't bother smoothing it out. I checked the window lock, still latched, and the closet, cardboard flattened with a corner bent like it had been dragged. I took quick photos for the log, closed the door, tagged it, and told myself I'd get the supervisor involved because it felt like I'd just walked in on the middle of something and whoever I'd missed wasn't far. In the morning, I reported everything to the building supervisor, Paul, who had coffee and that looked like he'd heard it all. He scrolled my photos and shrugged. "Probably she came back early and forgot to sign in," he said, and he pointed at the policy about residents allowed to access with valid IDs. I told him about the deli timestamps and the laundry room door, and he held up a hand. "I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying there's a process. If she files a complaint about unlawful entry, I need to say you had cause." I said, "'Cause was the door ajar and noise inside?" He nodded like that made it fine, then told me to email housing so they could ping the resident. He added, "Don't stir up a panic over break. Keep your rounds tight." Which meant do your job but don't make waves, and I left thinking if someone was actually living off our blind spots, they'd heard that message before. Over the next few nights, the small stuff piled up. David said he heard careful footsteps above the lobby after 2, not sprinting, more like someone pacing out counts. I knew that sound. People measure patterns when they're hiding. The light in 2F's study room would be on during rounds and off 10 minutes later with no one passing cameras. A carton of yogurt went missing from the staff fridge. Nobody cared about yogurt, but we all noticed when it kept happening. We'd find a bathroom stall on the 4th floor propped with a roll of toilet paper like someone's crude doorstop, and then later, it'd be gone. Carl from maintenance mentioned a door to the roof ladder had fresh scratches near the latch, like someone fiddled with a flathead. Then said, "Kids," and let it drop. And then Marco, one of the weekend guards, found the basement storage room unlocked even though he swore he'd padlocked it, and behind the old couches and broken chairs, there were 2 sleeping bags rolled tight, a crate of canned beans and peaches, and a little pile of loose quarters in a sandwich bag. He radioed, "You guys seeing this?" We took photos, logged it, locked it back up with a new lock, and didn't broadcast it past our group, because if it got out, it'd turn into a joke or a rumor, and neither helps you catch anyone. We responded the way we were supposed to. We increased patrol frequency, split the building so there were fewer dead minutes, and we started keying into empty rooms in pairs so there was a witness every time. No he said, she said if someone complained. We did door checks on the exits every hour, checked vents big enough for a body, not many, and kept the laundry lights off unless someone was physically present. After about a week, the incidents just stopped. The yogurt stayed put, the study lights behaved, the doors didn't squeak. Security pulled the last 10 days from cameras, and we sat through that grainy gray, and it was nothing conclusive. Shadows in stairwells that could be bad exposure. A figure in a hoodie going out the side door at 3:17 a.m. with their head down, no face. A smear on the alley cam that might have been rain or a sleeve. We marked times, handed it to Paul, and he said housing couldn't confirm the 4C resident had returned early or not, because her phone went straight to voicemail, and she was marked as away, family visit. It was a pile of almosts and maybes, which is exactly how you lose someone who knows what we log and when we log it. David said, "They're gone," like a fact, and I said, "For now." Because people who map schedules don't just vanish, they move. I'm convinced someone was living in the dorm illegally, moving between vacant rooms and using our facilities during quiet hours. And I'm not saying that to make it sound bigger than it was. It was just the pattern you see when someone watches you long enough to learn your blind angles. They obviously knew our roots, and when David drowned out the world with his headphones, and they stayed a step ahead by never repeating the same room twice, hitting laundry when the machine noise covered theirs, and tapping that door on night 1 to see if anyone cared enough to walk toward a sound that didn't fit. What still bothers me is not catching up to them, and not knowing how long they'd been slipping through. Weeks? The whole semester? And whether they were just trying to stay warm, or if there was something else, like scouting rooms for later, or checking who left laptops out. After that semester, the building installed better card readers and added motion detectors in the basements and a camera that actually covered the alley without dying when it rained. But I never worked a night shift there again without double-checking every single room on my list, and then going back once more to the ones that felt wrong, because that's how it starts. A door that moves when it shouldn't, food you didn't put in a trash can, a bed that remembers a head that isn't supposed to be there. I should have trusted my instincts when Charlie insisted on giving me a ride to his mechanic shop at 1 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. But let me start from the beginning of that night. I was driving through the empty stretches of Nevada Highway, coming back from a photography assignment at Joshua Tree National Park. My camera equipment was secured in the back, and I was making good time toward my next shoot location in Utah. The highway was practically deserted except for the occasional long-haul trucker, which made for peaceful driving through the desert landscape. Around midnight, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror that seemed to be flashing their high beams repeatedly. The driver was clearly trying to get my attention about something urgent. I travel for a living. Parks, back roads, overlooks. So I'm careful with the car, and I don't ignore weird stuff. I eased off the gas, checked the temp and oil pressure, scanned for warning lights. Everything looked normal. No smell of coolant or oil. No loss of power. No misfire. Nothing pulling left or right. Still, the car behind me stayed too close, backed off, then surged again, lights strobing like a signal. I tried changing lanes to let them pass. They wouldn't. It felt less like a public service and more like I was being pushed, which sounds dramatic. But out there you learn to respect small signals because small signals become big problems fast. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand, I don't blow off potential breakdowns at night in the middle of nowhere. A trucker once flagged me for a dragging bungee on a tripod case. A rancher pointed out a slow leak on my spare. So when I saw a gas station ahead, the only lit island for miles, I signaled and took the exit. I rolled under the buzzing canopy and parked by the pump with the security camera dome over it. The other driver followed and slid into the lane across from me, then killed their lights in one quick motion like they'd practiced it. The place was empty. No attendant, no other cars, just a humming soda machine, a trash can with a cracked lid, and a squeegee tray full of gray water. The guy got out fast, waving both arms. "Hey man, you've got smoke," he called. He looked like a mechanic. Dark work pants, scuffed boots, short-sleeve work shirt with a stitched name tag where the last letters were torn, grease on his knuckles. He jogged to my grill and leaned down like he already had permission. "Smelled it back there," he said. "You don't want to cook this thing." "The gauges are fine," I said, popping the hood but keeping my keys in my hand. He told me not to run it another second and reached in toward my ignition like he knew my car better than me. I blocked him with my forearm. Not aggressive, just firm. He stepped back, palms up, still nodding at the front. It was there, I swear. Wisps, then gone, he said, a little breathless. "I'm Charlie. I got a shop up the road. Family place." I lifted the hood and clipped it. He slid in next to me, pointing rapid fire. "Radiator's spitting," he said first, tapping the cap with a fingernail. Then, "No, hear that?" Exhaust manifolds heat soaking the harness. A beat later it was oil pan gasket weeping onto the block, and then PCV blow by. Every time I asked where exactly, he'd shift to a new spot. The diagnosis kept changing, but the conclusion didn't. "You're not making it to the next town." He said it like a fact, like gravity. The engine was cool. I pulled the dipstick, clean amber, coolant overflow at the line, brake fluid clear. No steam, no hiss. I slid my flashlight under the crossmember and looked for fresh drips. The concrete showed only old stains. "If it was rad fluid, I'd smell it," I said. "If it was oil, there'd be residue." He countered with, "Could be internal," said it might only smoke under load. Showed me a small, reddened knuckle like proof he'd brushed a hot part, which could have been from anything. It felt like he needed me to agree more than he needed to be right. I started the car to watch the temps. He told me not to. The idle held steady. Fans cycled at the usual point. The needle didn't move. "Where you headed?" he asked over the sound. "Utah," I said. "Sunrise shoot." He glanced through my back glass at the Pelican cases and soft bag, then back to my face, then to the road. "Hate to see you stranded with all that," he muttered, almost like he was talking to himself. "I'm just saying," he went on, circling my bumper. "Next town's 30 miles and there's a grade before it. If your pump's weak, you'll overheat halfway and trucks fly through there at night. My shop's right up the road." He pointed into the dark across the highway. No sign, no light. Just the idea of a shop in the black. I closed the hood and set the latch. "Appreciate it," I said, "but I'm not seeing an issue." He kept his voice easy, but there was a push under it. "Damage can be internal," he repeated, then changed the angle. "Service out here is garbage. AAA won't find you till morning. I've got a tow dolly 10 minutes and you're safe. I won't charge just to look." He smiled like that solved everything. I checked my phone. One flickering bar. The pump's card reader had duct tape over it. The receipt slot was stuffed. Small things, but they stacked up wrong. "What's your shop called?" I asked. "Roadside Charlie's," he said without blinking. It sounded like a nickname, not a sign on a building. You'll never make it to the next town like this. Like what exactly? I said. He exhaled and said, head gasket probably. Could be timing. Could be a cracked radiator neck. Can't diagnose it in a parking lot. The list grew and got vaguer. He kept glancing at the highway like somebody else was late. I tried the practical route. If it heats up, I'll pull over before the grade. I've got water and blankets, I told him. He shook his head. Big rigs barrel through there. You don't want the shoulder at night. He angled toward his car, then back to me, like he couldn't decide whether to fetch something or keep talking. I'm not here to make a buck off you, he added softer. I saw smoke. I don't want to read about a wreck in the morning. Let me get you taken care of. We'll pressure test it. No charge. 15 minutes you're rolling. What if you're right? I asked. Then you'll thank me for saving your engine. The canopy buzzed. The wind moved grit across the concrete. My engine ticked as it cooled when I shut it off again. He watched my hands, then my eyes, like the decision lived there, like I'd already agreed and just hadn't said it out loud. He stepped closer with his palms open, calm voice. No more lectures, just the close. He offered to tow my car to his shop right away. Something about his sudden urgency felt wrong, especially since it was the middle of the night and no legitimate shop would be open. I told him I'd rather try driving to the next town and get it checked in the morning. That's when Charlie grabbed my arm and practically demanded that I get in his truck immediately. He said my car could explode at any moment and it was too dangerous to drive. His whole demeanor had changed from helpful to aggressive, and I realized this might not be about car trouble at all. I pulled away from him and went straight to my driver's door because that was the shortest path and kept the car between us. He tried to talk over me, saying I was making a huge mistake and I was going to regret it, but I didn't answer. I just got in, shut it, and hit the locks. The click was loud in the empty station. Charlie came to the window fast and cupped his hands to see inside like I was hiding something. He pressed his face close and started shouting about catastrophic failure and said if I started it, the engine would seize and catch fire. And I told him through the glass that I'd call for a tow in the morning and he needed to back up. He shook his head and said he had a buddy in highway patrol who would write me up for reckless driving if I left, which made no sense. Then he grabbed the handle and yanked hard even though the lock was down and the whole door shivered. He slapped the window with his palm and leaned down so I could see the name patch was torn at the edges like it had been ripped off one shirt and sewn onto another. He kept talking fast, throwing out words like detonation and blowback and warped head, trying to scare me, and I kept my hands where he could see them. When he hooked his fingers over the top of the frame, I hit the horn, just a short blast. He flinched, checked the highway, and stepped back. I turned the key. He was actually trying to open my door when I started the engine. My car started up perfectly, just like it had been running all evening, and I eased out from under the canopy and pointed the nose to the on-ramp. I didn't floor it because the road's dark and animals pop out, but I brought it up to speed and watched the temp, watched the oil pressure, watched the mirror. Charlie hustled back to his truck and sat there with the lights off like he was thinking it over. Then he started it, rolled forward a few feet, and stopped. He didn't follow. I kept the cabin lights off and the screen dim so I wouldn't draw attention if he changed his mind, and I kept a steady pace just under the limit because speed gives you less time to react if something jumps out. The gauges sat exactly where they always sit. 10 minutes later, I passed a mile marker I recognized and realized I'd been so focused on him, I'd stopped tracking anything else. I tightened my seatbelt, put the phone in the cup holder, and set a simple rule. If the temp moved even 1 bar, I'd hit the shoulder with the heater on. It never did. I drove the next 100 miles without any problems whatsoever, and the next morning, I had a mechanic check everything thoroughly. The shop was busy and boring in the best way. Real signage, real invoices, actual certifications on the wall. They pressure tested the cooling system, scanned for codes, put it on a lift, checked the manifold and the pan and even the hoses just to humor me. No leaks, no odd smells, no stored faults. Compression was solid. The tech wiped his hands and said my car was healthy, and I believed him. A few days later, I saw a report about staged highway robberies nearby. The suspect matched Charlie and they never caught him, so I never stopped for strangers on empty highways. When I was 8, my dad insisted on these weekend family trips that my mom never seemed to enjoy. This time we went to Lake Shasta in Northern California and rented a cabin for 3 days. The place was beautiful but isolated, with the nearest neighbors about a mile away. The first day was normal. We roasted marshmallows, Dad told stories around the campfire, and Mom read on the porch. But on the second day, something changed. Dad kept looking out the windows and went outside several times to check on our car. When I asked what was wrong, he said he just wanted to make sure we were safe and told me not to wander far from the cabin. Mom started packing our stuff that evening, even though we were supposed to stay another day. In the morning, the smiles looked pasted on. Dad kept the paper map open and his keys in his pocket instead of the bowl by the door. He double-knotted my sneakers and told me to keep my jacket where I could see it. When I went to toss bread to birds, he followed me to the steps and watched the driveway. He asked twice if I'd slept okay. Mom wiped the counter and put the peanut butter back in the bag like we were leaving soon. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand how my dad worked. Sales, 2 phones, constant calls. That afternoon, his work phone buzzed every few minutes. He'd silence it and step to the side of the cabin to make calls where I couldn't hear. As the light dropped, he stacked firewood by the door and slid the deadbolt. I heard them talking in hushed voices, catching only fragments like police, can't wait, and she needs to know. Around midnight, I woke to an engine outside. A dark SUV moved slowly up our driveway with its headlights off, stopped near the cabin for about 10 minutes, and nobody got out. It finally turned around and drove away. In the morning, Dad said it was probably a lost tourist, but his face went pale. We didn't make pancakes like always. He kept his jacket on inside and told me to put my shoes on, just in case we go for a drive. He opened the door for air, shut it, and checked the deadbolt each time. I heard him say on the phone, "We're leaving at first light," then hang up fast when I flushed. Mom had me pack only a sweater, a book, and my rabbit. We left at dawn without breakfast, and Dad kept checking his mirrors the entire drive home. He stopped at 3 gas stations, each time spending a long time looking behind us. Mom held my hand and didn't speak. When we got home, Dad locked all the doors and closed the curtains, even though it was still daylight. That evening, 2 men in suits came to our house and had a long conversation with Dad in the living room while Mom made me dinner. I heard pieces, threats, temporarily, new address. On the highway, he took an exit, looped under, then merged back on like he was checking if anyone stayed with us. At the first gas station, he parked nose out and stood at the edge of the lot staring at the road. "Bathroom?" he asked me without turning. Mom kept her purse in her lap, zipper open. When a truck with an empty trailer rolled by slow, Dad's hand went flat on my shoulder until it passed. At the second stop, he made me count to 30 before we got out. "Game," he said. He kept me between him and the storefront. Back in the car, he dialed and asked for Patrick, then hung up without a message. I watched the speedometer climb and fall as he matched other cars. By the time we reached our street, Mom had my stuffed rabbit in her lap. Dad shut off the engine and said, "Straight inside," in his earthquake drill voice. He locked the door, slid the chain, and clicked each window latch. He brought the tire iron in from the trunk. The curtains stayed closed. He set both phones on the counter and turned them off. When the men in suits knocked, they didn't ring. They showed badges and stepped in, polite but fast. One asked if I liked third grade and I said second, and he nodded. They talked low with Dad while Mom microwaved macaroni and stood by the sink without eating. From my chair I heard credible, work-related, stay put, temporarily, and new address. One of the men asked if Dad had told her, and he said, "Tonight." They gave him a card and said a car would swing by in the morning. After they left, Dad locked up again and sat me at the table. "Okay," he said, "I need you to be brave and listen." He said there were issues with his job, nothing I had done, nothing I could fix, and that some people had said things that made him worry about our safety. "It's not forever," he said. "We're going to stay with Grandma for a bit. New school for a while, new address. That's all." Mom nodded like she'd already heard it and squeezed my hand under the table while he talked. He said it would be for a while. We actually did move to Arizona the following week and lived with my grandmother for 6 months. Dad found a new job. Mom got work at the local library, and I started at a new school. They never fully explained what had happened, only saying that Dad had disagreements with his former employer. I noticed them watching the evening news and changing the channel when shootings or arrests were mentioned. We kept things simple: Grandma's spare room, a twin bed, my backpack by the door. Dad rotated his route to work and changed his phone number. We ate and stayed home. Now, before I explain what happened when we came back, you should know how that 6 months went. Grandma's place had a metal security door and a stick in the back slider, and Dad checked both each night like a checklist. He put timers on 2 lamps and taped a list of emergency numbers inside the pantry. Once, a white pickup idled on the street for a long time, and Dad stood at the kitchen window until it left. He took me to school and picked me up on time, and if he was late, Mom came, not a neighbor. We returned home a year later, to the same house but new locks and a camera over the porch. Dad had changed jobs again, different company, different office park. He never suggested family trips after that. Each evening he'd run the same loop: front door, back door, garage, windows, twice. He started keeping shoes by the bed and the car keys on the dresser. I'd hear him at night, quiet, checking the slider, the side gate, then pausing like he was counting. There were little things. A man at the door asking for a survey, and Dad sent him away without opening. A package with no return address, and he called the number on the label before touching it. One time our mailbox was open and empty on a day mail should have come, and he drove to the post office to ask our route supervisor by name. Another evening a car slowed near our driveway, then rolled on, and he watched it until it turned the corner. He wrote the plate down. By the time I was a freshman in college, it felt like a weird family quirk. I was in the dorm lounge folding shirts when a local station ran a segment about corporate corruption. Graphics. The anchor saying the company name I recognized. I moved closer. They said the company had helped launder money for a cartel using shell vendors and fake contracts. There was a clip of a press conference. The reporter said several employees had received threats after they started cooperating with the FBI. Dates flashed under their names. I called my mom first. She said, "Where are you?" Then, "Is anyone with you?" And after I said no, she said, "Your dad will call you in 5. He did. He asked if I'd seen the report. I said yes. He said he had left when he realized what was happening at work, that he'd talked to some people, and that the visit from the suits back then was what I thought. "We did what they told us," he said. We made it boring. I asked if the SUV at the cabin had been part of it. He paused, then said, "Probably someone checking who was at that address. We weren't the target, but we didn't need to be." He explained that when the investigation heated up, people who stayed visible got contacted. Calls, cars outside, notes under wipers. One guy got followed leaving his kid's soccer practice. Another moved into a hotel under a different name. "I didn't wait to find out which list I was on," he said. Looking back now, the timeline fits too well to be anything else. The calls he took outside, deadbolt checks, our move, that slow SUV at the cabin. It wasn't random. Real people were leaning on employees to keep money quiet, and families like mine got caught in the noise. Dad kept us boring and moving until it passed. It disrupted everything, but it worked, and I'm grateful he chose that anyway. When I was 25 and working remotely, I lived alone in a ground-floor apartment in what I thought was a safe neighborhood. The building was older but well-maintained, with good lighting and security cameras in the hallways. I'd been living there for about 8 months without any problems, so I felt pretty secure. Most of my neighbors were young professionals like me, and we all looked out for each other. That night in October, I'd gone to bed around midnight after finishing a project deadline. I was in deep sleep when loud knocking on my front door woke me up at 3 a.m. At first I thought it might be an emergency with one of my neighbors, but the knocking continued in a very deliberate pattern. I stayed still for a second, waiting to hear voices or maybe my name, but it was just that knock knock, pause, knock knock knock, like someone trying to send a message I didn't understand. I checked my phone, 3:01, squinted at the dark, and listened for any familiar sounds from the hallway. Footsteps, a neighbor's door opening, something. But there was nothing except that repeated pattern. I threw on a hoodie and the first pair of sweatpants on the chair. I sleep in a t-shirt usually. Details no one needs, but it matters because I wasn't going to the door in just that. And I stood there a few feet back, heart going fast, but trying to be sensible. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand my front door faced a little internal corridor off the main hallway. You had to come down 2 steps to reach it, and a camera faced that spot, which I liked. And the deadbolt was new because my landlord had replaced it when I moved in. So I tell myself it's probably nothing. Wrong door, drunk Uber Eats, something. And I call out, "Hello? Who is it?" The knocking stops for a half second like they're listening. Then it starts again, harder. That's when I made the decision to not open it under any circumstances. I crept to the window next to the door and carefully pulled a sliver of curtain back. There was a person in a bright red puffy jacket with the hood pulled up, completely hiding their face. They were holding what looked like a large manila envelope in one hand, bent at the corner like it had something inside. They kept looking around, left, right, like they were expecting someone else to show up or to check for witnesses. I called again, louder. "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer. They just raised their palm and started hitting the door flat out, steady, like they wanted me to be scared, but also to think it was urgent. I said, "If you don't answer, I'm calling the police." And that finally made them pause. They tilted their head toward the camera in the hall like they knew it was there. Then, without a word, they stepped back, stuffed the envelope under the jacket, and started walking, calmly, not running, around the side of the building toward the small path that leads along the windows. I felt my skin crawl because the only path like that passes my bedroom window, and there was no reason for anyone to be there at 3 a.m. unless they wanted to look in. I moved fast to the kitchen, which has a small window that sees the strip of grass by my bedroom. From there, I could see the red jacket bobbing in and out of the weak light, and then the cold white circle of a flashlight flicked on. They angled it straight through my bedroom blinds, close, like they were trying to see if I was alone or if anything was worth grabbing. I whispered, "Nope," without thinking, just reflex, and ducked down because light swept over the wall near me too. They moved methodically from window to window, testing the bottom edges to see if any were unlocked. I heard the soft, rubbery squeak of their jacket as they leaned on the frames. At my living room window, they crouched and spent several minutes working on the latch with something thin. Sounded like a small, flat tool, metal clicking against metal. I could feel each tiny scrape like it was on my teeth. That's when I decided to call the police, because at that point, this wasn't a neighbor or a lost delivery. This was someone trying to get in. Period. I backed into the pantry nook, phone wedged under my ear, and whispered to the dispatcher that someone was attempting to break into my apartment right now. Ground floor, back windows. She asked for my address, my name, if I was alone. I told her yes, I live alone, and I can see them. Red jacket. They have a flashlight. They're using a tool. And she said officers were being dispatched and to stay on the line and not confront them. While I'm talking, I hear the sound shift. The little scrapes stop at the window, and I feel that hollow silence before a new noise starts at the front door. Footsteps on the corridor steps, careful this time. Then the whisper of fabric so close I could have touched it if not for the door. The person started messing with the lock, and the sound wasn't subtle. It was a deliberate metal-on-metal rasp, the kind you hear when someone's got time and a plan. The handle moved slightly, very slight, but enough that the reflection on the knob wobbled. I told the dispatcher, "They're at my front door now. They're trying the lock." And she told me to move to a safe spot without making noise, keep the line open, and if I had a way to defend myself, to keep it nearby but not seek a confrontation. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I own, not dramatic, just what I had, an 8-inch chef's knife, sharp because I cook a lot. And I kept the phone on speaker, even though I hated how loud my breathing sounded. I remembered the back of the building exit door that sticks, everyone complains about it, and considered making a run for it. But I pictured stepping into the dark with whoever was out there circling, and it felt like trading one bad unknown for another. The dispatcher said officers were close. No times given, just, "They're on the way," and told me to put something between me and the entry points. I slid the deadbolt fully, already in, but I checked it again because that's what you do when you're scared. You check things you already did. And I moved sideways along the inside wall, counting off the locks in my head like a checklist I wouldn't forget. Deadbolt, chain, the small screw-on reinforcement plate I installed myself after a YouTube video. My landlord wasn't going to complain if the door was safer. The scraping got more aggressive, like they'd switched tools or decided to risk making more noise. I could hear their breathing, I swear I could. Slow, controlled, not panicked. I kept low and went past the couch, past the small dining table that's basically a laptop desk most days, and into the far corner between the fridge and the coat closet where the wall doesn't have any windows and you can't be seen from the door unless someone steps all the way in. The dispatcher told me, "Stay there. Officers are being updated. Keep the line open," and asked if there was any other way in. I said just the windows they'd already tried, and I pressed my back into that corner, knife in one hand, phone in the other, listening to the handle twitch while I went to the far corner of my apartment to wait for the police. Time stretched while the scraping at the lock got rhythmic, stop-start like they were testing pressure points, and every time it stopped I held my breath waiting for the click that would mean it gave, but it didn't. And then I heard their steps pull away, and the faint squeak of jacket at the window tracks again. I kept the dispatcher on speaker but low, and when she asked if I could safely observe, I told her I'd try the peephole, because I wasn't going to sit blind if I could get a look. I crawled along the wall, knife in my hand, and when the hall was quiet for a few beats, I slid to the door, stood on my toes, and peered through. They were crouched right there, face still hidden by the hood, several small metal tools spread out on the mat like a roll-up kit. Thin picks, a tension wrench, something like a rake, and they were moving slow like they'd done this before. I whispered what I saw to the dispatcher, and she said, "Stay back." So I eased away and thought of anything else I could do without opening a door or yelling. I remembered the switches by the kitchen that control the exterior corridor lights and the small flood over the back path. My landlord is obsessed with visibility because of insurance. So I went there and flipped every exterior light I had on full. The corridor flooded bright. The back path turned from black to a harsh white strip, and for a second I felt stupidly hopeful, like that would shoo them off. It didn't. Through the peephole again, I saw them freeze, grab the tools into a fist, and then drift back into the edge of the stair shadow where the camera's angle wasn't great. They stood there, not moving much, facing my door. The dispatcher reminded me officers were en route, told me to keep describing. "They're watching," I said. "They're just standing there." Then I heard the scrape against the bedroom window again, like they were looping the route, checking if light affected anything. From my bedroom window, using the smallest sliver of blind, I saw the red jacket at the edge of the property, half behind the thin trunk of the only tree there. Bare branches, no cover, but they still tucked themselves in like they knew how shadows work. Every few minutes, like on a timer, they'd walk back to my door and try the lock again, then the windows, then waiting. I texted my neighbor across the hall, just the word, "awake," and didn't send more because I didn't want her opening her door into this. The dispatcher kept me talking. Date of birth, description. Whether I recognized the jacket or the build, I didn't. Whether I'd had any recent issues with anyone, no. If I had a car and where it was parked, street, not helpful. I could feel the time moving but not fast enough, and every pass they did got more confident. Hands on my handle longer, very gradual force. At one point, the person leaned close to the door like they were listening for movement inside, and I held still, even though my legs were shaking a little from crouching. The envelope from earlier was gone. They had both hands free. I think they heard something down the hall, maybe the hum of the elevator starting, because they slipped back behind the tree again and stayed perfectly still. And when the sound faded, they came right back, a quiet stride, like this was a job and I was the mark. The dispatcher said, 2 minutes out, and I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I kept counting the seconds between their passes, trying to line it up with the elevator hums, with the distant street sounds. When the police finally arrived, lights without sirens so I didn't hear them, just sudden blue flicker against my blinds, the person had vanished completely. The first thing I knew of it was the sharp knocks, 3, firm, and a male voice calling my name through the door with the exact phrasing the dispatcher told me to expect. I verified through the peephole, 2 uniforms, 1 female, 1 male, and cracked the chain so I could pass my ID. They told me to hold while they cleared, and I stepped back and let them work. Another unit swept outside. The red jacket wasn't anywhere. They searched the immediate area and found several lock-picking tools scattered near my door like somebody scooped wrong in a hurry, along with a couple of detailed photographs of my building taken from different angles, the corridor, the back path, my windows from the sidewalk. In my mail slot, pushed down so it bent against the inner flap, there was a crumpled piece of paper with a rough floor plan of my place, boxy lines showing the door, the living room, the bedroom, even a little note where the couch is, which made my scalp prickle because you can only guess that from knowing people put couches against that wall, right? One of the cops said, in that steady voice, that it looked like someone had been planning this break-in for a while, possibly watching my daily routine, because the photos weren't night shots only. One was in daylight, angled at the hallway camera like they were checking its field. He asked if I post my schedule anywhere, public profiles, stories, that kind of thing. I told him no, and he believed me. He said it could also be someone who's cased multiple units, and I got picked because of location. Ground floor, corner, fast exit path. They dusted the handle, bagged the tools and the paper, took my statement in the living room where I could keep eyes on the door, and then walked the building manager through pulling the camera footage. They increased patrols for the next few weeks. They said it out loud, and also wrote it on the incident card they handed me. The person never came back. I moved to a second-floor apartment the next month. Same complex because breaking a lease wasn't realistic for me at that moment, and I installed extra window locks and a wedge bar on the balcony slider, and a battery camera facing the stairwell. I still check all my locks twice before bed, and yeah, that sounds basic, but it's not a ritual so much as a list now. Front deadbolt, strike plate screws, slider bar, bedroom latch, and I do it with the lights on because I don't assume light scares anyone anymore. What sticks with me isn't the fear exactly, it's the organization. The way that person worked in a circle like they'd practiced. And I keep thinking how close their ear was to my door while I stood in the corner holding a kitchen knife like that was going to be enough. About 3 weeks ago, I moved into this old Victorian house in Portland that Mrs. Collins had converted into 4 rental units. I got the room on the first floor with a separate entrance through the back porch, which was perfect for my schedule since I worked late shifts at a restaurant. The other tenants seemed quiet, an elderly guy upstairs, a young couple next door, and a college student in the converted attic. The house was pretty run down with creaky floors and rattling windows, but the rent was affordable. For the first 2 weeks, everything was normal and peaceful. Then weird stuff started happening that I couldn't explain. I'd come home and the porch mat was crooked, even though I always nudge it straight. And once the chain on my interior door was hanging like it had been jostled. A clean skillet I'd left upside down had a ring of water and a single apple seed in it, even though the sink was bone dry. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand the layout. My room is a studio with a tiny bathroom and a locked door to the shared hallway I never use. I enter from the back porch, screen door, then the main with a deadbolt. The living room window faces the side yard. The sash sticks unless you lift and bump it left, and the inside latch doesn't fully catch unless you push it hard. Food began disappearing from my fridge. Not entire meals, just pieces here and there. A chunk of cheese, some apples, half a jar of peanut butter. I figured maybe one of the other tenants was borrowing stuff temporarily, so I didn't make a big deal about it. But then my spare toothbrush vanished from the bathroom, still in its package. Last Wednesday, coming home from work around midnight, I found lights on in my room, even though I definitely remembered turning them off that morning. Inside, someone had moved my furniture around. The armchair was by the window instead of in the corner, and there was an open book on my table that I hadn't been reading. Wet stains on the windowsill suggested someone had been eating fruit there. I checked the closet and under the bed, then the hallway door, deadbolt still thrown. On the window track, there was a smear through dust like a thumb had dragged it, and the little dowel I'd wedged between the sash and frame was on the floor like someone had set it aside carefully. I texted the couple next door. "You guys plug anything in? My lamp's on." "We're at my mom's," she replied. I slept with my shoes by the bed and the heavy skillet on the chair because that felt better than nothing. In the morning, I installed an extra lock on the back door, a latch guard with long screws, and swapped the flimsy dowel for a tight piece of closet rod. Then I asked Mrs. Collins if anyone else had keys to my room. She said no, but looked worried and started asking about strange sounds other tenants had been hearing at night. Turns out the college student had heard footsteps on the first floor when I wasn't home, and the elderly neighbor complained about cooking smells in the middle of the night. She'd figured it was the couple's late snacks until I told her about the toothbrush in the chair. "Okay, document everything. Text me times," she said. This weekend I decided to stake out my place by pretending to leave, but actually staying inside. On Saturday, I left at 10 p.m., coat, keys, and let the porch light click off behind me. I walked down the driveway, counted to 10 past the hedge, then cut back along the fence and slipped onto the porch. I'd prepped the room earlier. One lamp plugged in, one unplugged, the chair by the window again, and the rod lying on the sill like bait. I silenced my phone and sat on the floor behind the couch, where I could see the back door and the angle to the window. Around midnight, nothing happened. Around 2 a.m. I heard scratching at my back door lock, faint, then more deliberate, like a small metal tool slipping and turning. It paused, then a tiny click I felt through the floorboards, and the knob twisted once, twice. I rose into a crouch and looked through the peephole. A figure in dark clothes with the hood up was pressed close to the door, shoulder angled, one hand at the knob, the other mid-body like they were working something. I couldn't make out a face. The new latch guard held. The deadbolt didn't budge. The knob kept turning anyway, patient. I reached for my phone to record and saw the ringer was up. If it chirped, I'd blow it. So I set it down and waited. The knob stopped. A soft exhale on the other side. Then a whisper I couldn't catch. The porch board creaked under a shifting foot. I stayed low with my shoulder under the knob in case of a shove. The motion light didn't trip. The figure leaned in like they were listening, then stepped back. I held my breath and listened to my pulse. When the door wouldn't open, the person walked around the house and tried the living room window. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, whoever it was had disappeared. I waited until the window stopped moving before I dialed, whispering to dispatch while I watched the side yard. 2 units slid in quiet with lights off, and the officers swept the porch and the windows with flashlights. At the living room window, they showed me a thin cut in the screen and paint shaved from the latch. Same kind of marks on the kitchen window and on the couple's laundry room window. Inside, they checked the hallway door, still bolted, and had the couple step over. She said she'd smelled fruit in the stairwell on Tuesday at like 3 in the morning, and he said he'd heard a pan clink when they weren't home. The elderly neighbor leaned over the upstairs railing and said, "I keep hearing cooking," and the student from the attic asked if they could check the crawl space hatch. One officer called the other to the backyard where a narrow path was pressed into the grass along the hedge, straight from the porch to the old shed. The shed door swung in because the latch was long broken, and inside their lights caught a rolled sleeping bag, 2 dented cans of chili, a water bottle, a small flashlight with tape on the handle, and my spare toothbrush in its torn package on top of a folded hoodie. My name was still written on it from move-in. The officer bagged it, then pointed out a spoon with dried peanut butter and a grocery bag with apple stickers crushed in the bottom. No ID, no wallet, nothing personal. He traced the route from the shed to my steps, hugging the hedge where the motion light never trips, and said, "Someone's been living back here and learning you." Mrs. Collins came out in a coat over pajamas, and, when they asked, admitted she'd found the shed door open a few times and heard someone on the stairs late at night, but thought it was tenants. She said she'd been afraid to call because she didn't want to scare people into moving. They dusted the window latches and the back doorknob, but told me not to count on prints. They taped off the shed and slapped on a temporary lock, told us they'd increase patrols, and wrote up attempted burglary and trespass, They gave Mrs. Collins a list: trim the hedge, rekey the hallway, add lighting, and took statements from all of us. By morning, she had a contractor replace my back door and deadbolt, and a locksmith change the other locks, and she scheduled an alarm install and cameras facing the porch and side yard. Later, we didn't see the figure again. They never found the actual intruder. The house now has an alarm system, but I still hear soft sounds outside my window sometimes and wonder if they've returned. And what bothers me most is how long this person was living that close, learning our habits and routines, because they knew exactly when each room would be empty and how to slide through without being noticed. The officers said this happens more than people think, someone camping on the edge of a property and living off gaps in attention, and that stuck with me. Sometimes I angle the blinds to check the shed tape and the new lock, just to make sure nothing's shifted. I keep a short log on my phone: motion chime times, any smell in the hall, a step in the gravel. Not for drama, just so I don't miss a pattern. Even with the new deadbolt, I added a door bar, and I've started changing my schedule so it's harder to predict when I'm gone. We text each other when we leave and when we're back now, and Mrs. Collins set the system to chime if the hallway door opens after midnight. I sleep with my shoes by the bed and my keys in my pocket, and if I wake at 3, I stand at the peephole and listen. Quiet, steady, because catching the sound early is the only edge we have, and if they ever come back, I want to be standing there already. So, when I was 19 and living in a cramped dorm room, I was constantly looking for cheap furniture to make the space more livable. Facebook Marketplace was perfect for finding affordable stuff from other students who were moving or graduating. I found this simple wooden desk listed for $25 by a guy named Brad, which was exactly what I needed for studying. The photos looked fine and the price was right, so I messaged him about picking it up. Brad responded quickly and suggested meeting at the parking lot of a nearby shopping center the next afternoon. He said it would be easier than giving directions to his place, which seemed reasonable enough to me. The listing had 3 photos: top view, drawers open, a close-up of the wood grain that looked kinda dry, but honestly, I didn't care because I just needed somewhere to put my laptop and notepads. His profile looked normal, couple of marketplace reviews, both saying easy transaction and desk as described. I asked if it would fit in a hatchback, and he replied almost instantly, "Yep, I've got blankets to help pad it," which sounded prepared in a good way. He tossed in a line about being on a tight schedule because of his move, so could we do 2:30? I said sure, and he sent a thumbs up. I remember thinking how nice it was not to be ghosted. The next day I pulled into the lot a few minutes early and saw an old tan station wagon with the trunk popped and these gray moving blankets tucked around a small pile of stuff. Brad waved me over like we were already mid-conversation. He looked like a normal guy in his 30s, work shirt with a name patch, not his name, which I noticed later, faded jeans, beat-up work boots. The desk was exactly like in the photos, a little scuffed, 3 drawers on the right, nothing weird. He said, "You must be Anna?" And I said yeah, and he laughed that I'd found the place okay because he hates giving directions. We did quick small talk. He asked my major, I said bio. He said he'd done night classes once and hated statistics. Simple stuff. He suggested we load it first, so it doesn't start raining. Sky was clear. And I didn't argue because I did not feel like hovering around a parking lot longer than necessary. He slid the desk onto a folded blanket like he'd done it 100 times, and asked me where I wanted the drawers facing. I said right side toward the passenger so I could still see out the back, and he nodded and adjusted the angle. While he was tightening a ratchet strap, he actually had one. He said he was moving across town and selling off furniture he didn't want to haul up the new place's stairs. Made sense. I gave him the cash, and he counted it quickly without making it awkward, said thanks, and tucked it into a pocket under the shirt. If I'm being honest, he was just prepared. Too prepared, maybe. He had tape, a box cutter, extra bungee cords clipped on a ring, stuff I didn't expect for a $25 desk handoff. He pointed at a little dent on the desktop like, "Heads up, you can cover that with a mat," and offered to toss in the mat for free, which I declined. I already had one. He asked which dorm I was in, and I laughed it off with, "The one with the loud elevator," and he did that little, "Ha, you do," when you didn't get the answer you wanted, but you're not gonna push. Then he asked if I needed help driving it over. "I can follow you and help you get it up the stairs." And I told him my roommate was around and we'd be fine. He said no problem, and that I should message him if the strap shifted. I said thanks, but I didn't add him or anything, just nodded. When I closed my trunk, he didn't leave right away. He leaned on the wagon and watched me check the strap. I really did check it. Then looked past me at the general flow of cars, the way people look for someone they're meeting. I only remember that because it struck me as funny. Like, dude, the desk is already sold. Then he snapped out of it, said, "Drive safe," and pulled away slow, the kind of slow that keeps you in someone's rear view for a while. I took a different exit out of habit. Campus traffic is a mess, and I didn't see him again. 10 minutes later, I texted my roommate that I was in the circle and she came down like a champ. We got the desk up the 2 flights by doing that awkward stair pivot. Me on the bottom because I'm taller, her laughing that my cheap furniture habit was going to kill her knees before midterms did. We maneuvered it into our room and set it by the window because the outlet was right there, which meant no extension cable snaking under our beds. We'd already had one melted phone charger scare. She still blames my old adapter. The desk fit almost perfect, like a half-inch shy of the radiator pipe, so we didn't even have to shift our beds. I wiped it down with the last 3 Clorox wipes in the tub. No, we never remember to buy more. And the wood dust came up gray. The top looked better after a pass with my notebook on it just to see if it wobbled. It didn't. And then I started filling the drawers. Pens and sticky notes in the top, charger cables and my flash drive stash in the middle, textbooks in the bottom because it was deepest. The bottom drawer stuck near the last inch like there was a ridge, which I figured was just the track catching, so I pulled it all the way out to reset it. The runners were a little bent, and there was this dry, gummy line of tape residue on the inside back wall like someone had stuck something there a long time ago. I grabbed a paper towel to clean the dust, and my hand brushed something that wasn't dust, like the corner of plastic pressed flat. I reached farther and felt the edge of clear tape, and it was definitely covering something. I could feel the give of bag plastic under it. My roommate said, "What?" And I said, "There's something taped in here." And she rolled her chair over with that squeaky sound it always makes because the casters split. And I used my nail to lift a corner of the tape and peel slow so I didn't rip whatever was underneath. It was a small zip-top bag, the kind you'd use for like index cards or travel shampoo, but thinner. It was taped flush to the back so you'd never see it unless the drawer was completely out. I set the drawer on the bed and held the bag up because the light by the window was better, and I could see paper edges inside, photos, printed on matte stock, and a couple of folded notes tucked behind them. My roommate did the noise that means we should be careful, and I agreed, but I opened it because I wanted to know if it was receipts or something I should message the seller about. Like, I'm not trying to keep someone's documents, I just wanted a desk. I slid the photos out, and they were thicker than I expected, real prints, not just computer paper. I counted without meaning to. There were at least a dozen. I put the folded notes aside because the photos were on top and my brain just grabbed the first thing. The first picture was angled from the far side of the lot. The second was closer. The third showed my hatchback with my door open and me half-turned with my keys in my hand. Most of the photos were clearly taken during our meeting at the shopping center, showing me getting out of my car and talking to Brad. There were also pictures of me loading the desk into my car, and even one of me driving away from the parking lot. The handwritten notes had my license plate number, the time of our meeting, and my first name. But the most disturbing thing was a photo of the front entrance to my dorm building, even though I'd never told Brad where I lived. Someone had clearly followed me back to campus and taken that picture without me knowing. I immediately tried to contact Brad through Facebook Messenger, but his profile was completely gone. When I searched for his name, nothing came up, like his account had been deleted or he'd blocked me. I laid everything flat on the desk and checked the backs for any stamps or markings. Nothing. The notes were written in neat block letters, all caps, things like 2:33 p.m. Lot C, and my plate underlined twice. One said, East Entrance 302, which matched the dorm photo exactly. The frame, the blue access panel, even the scratch on the metal kick plate. My roommate asked if we should call security or try to get him to respond first. I told her I'd try the chat one more time because if he answered, at least we'd have a number or something to give them. The chat thread was still there, but his name had turned into a blank silhouette, and I couldn't click through. When I typed, I found something in the desk, please respond, it failed with a little red icon. I tried opening his marketplace profile from the listing preview and got a page not available screen. I searched his first name plus the last initial on his shirt patch, which I realized might have been a borrowed shirt, and got nothing local. It looked like he wiped himself or never used his real info. That pushed me to move fast. We walked to campus security with the bag in my backpack because calling felt slower and I wanted a time-stamped report. I reinstalled the bottom drawer so our room wouldn't scream, "We found something," if anyone happened to get in while we were gone. From the stairwell window I checked the lot, a habit I didn't know I had till then, and there was no tan station wagon, no idling car. On the way over I replayed him offering to follow me and the way he didn't leave right away after I paid, how he watched me check the strap like he was waiting for something else. At the desk, a sergeant took our IDs and spread the photos and notes in a neat grid. He asked where I met the seller, whether anyone else knew about the pickup, how long it took, what he drove, what he looked like, whether the name on his shirt matched what he told me. It didn't. He wrote wagon tan, older model, and name patch diff, and circled the dorm entrance photo. He said they'd pull exterior cameras around 3 and request the shopping center footage if the city would share. He told us to make a police report too, since the lot was off campus. At the city station, a patrol officer put us in a small room and took my statement from scratch. He used a pen to nudge each photo into place, stopped at the dorm shot, and asked if anybody else could have taken it. I said no, I went straight from the lot to the dorm. He explained that photos taken in public places aren't illegal by themselves, which meant there wasn't much they could do unless he contacted me again, or trespassed or escalated. He did call it stalking behavior. He said to vary my routes, don't share my building, meet in busy spots, and to call 911 if I saw the wagon or the guy near my entrance. Back at the dorm, we shoved the desk so it wasn't square with the window. I know that doesn't solve anything, it just felt like one less clean line of sight. And I put the photos and notes in a shoebox on my closet shelf. I filed a housing ticket to flag the cameras like security suggested. I submitted a report to Facebook with screenshots of the listing and the dead chat, but the help center reply said they couldn't provide information about deleted accounts. I set up dumb little routines anyway. Different stairwells, random parking lots, no headphones at night. We told our floor's group chat not to meet sellers alone, and people immediately shared stories. One girl said a guy insisted on knowing her building to help carry. Another said someone asked what hours she was usually around. The officer called me the next week to say they'd logged my report and had the prints on file. But there was no plate hit on a tan wagon matching my description, and nothing usable from the shopping center without a subpoena they weren't going to get for this. He said to keep the shoebox and call if anything new happened. Nothing did. No messages, no wagon, no knocks. I meet sellers at the police station lobby or the campus exchange zone now, and I bring a friend, and I pay with exact cash, so there's no reason to linger. I don't answer questions that aren't about the item. I don't share my building or my schedule, and I don't let anyone follow me just to help. It sounds paranoid until you're standing in your own room holding a stack of photos of yourself moving through your day like a mark, with your plate number and your entrance time written in neat block letters, and the desk you bought is sitting by the window where you found them. So me and Tom were hauling freight from Vegas to Salt Lake City on Highway 93 when we hit these red warning lights around midnight. At first, we thought it was a traffic jam, but as we got closer, we realized it was construction barriers around a damaged section of road. No work crew was visible, just makeshift detour signs pointing us onto a narrow dirt road parallel to the highway. Tom, who'd been driving 4 hours, cursed since the detour would add 30 minutes, and we were already late. There was an old pickup ahead of us and a sedan behind, so we weren't the only ones stuck with it. The temporary road was poorly lit with just our headlights and a few reflectors showing the way. We rolled onto the dirt, and the trailer gave that low rattle you feel through the floor, so Tom backed it down to 30 and kept both hands tight. Out there, it's just black sky and scrub. So when someone throws a detour with flashing reds, you take it. You don't spin an 80-footer on a 2-lane. I watched the cones and plywood arrows. They looked fresh, weirdly clean, and made a note. The CB was dead air. Tom said the cones looked off. I said we'd be past it in a few miles if the map in my head was right. The pickup kept a steady pace, and the sedan's lights stayed with us like a tail. After about a mile on the detour, Tom said, "What's he doing?" and tapped the brakes. The pickup suddenly veered left off the track and disappeared behind a knot of rocks, even though there weren't any marked turns. No brake lights, no signal, just gone. We eased to a stop, hazards on, and I hopped down with my flashlight while Tom set the parking brake. The sedan behind us rolled up and stopped too. A middle-aged guy got out, said his name was Mike, and he had a strong flashlight. He moved like he'd done this before. We found the pickup in a shallow wash, tilted on its side like it laid down to rest. The passenger window was crazed. The airbags dusted the cab white. The driver, mid-20s with a backward cap, was conscious and trying to unbuckle. We stabilized the door, and Mike told him not to move his neck. "You hurt anywhere bad?" he asked, quick checks of eyes and hands. The kid said his shoulder and head hurt, but he could move his fingers and toes. There was nobody else in the cab. I shined the light under the seats, checked the bed, called out into the rocks. Nothing answered. We climbed him up out of the wash, slow, one under each arm, and got him to the dirt where Tom had the step dropped so he could sit. That's when he hit us with it. He said his passenger, a young woman, had suddenly grabbed the steering wheel and yanked them off the road. He said it twice like he couldn't believe it either. We looked back at the wash, then at the empty truck. Mike swept the rocks, checked behind boulders, up the slope. Nothing. No footprints we could make sense of in that dust. "Her name's Sarah," the kid said. Mike said he was a paramedic, off-duty, and started an assessment. The driver, Evan, was sober but agitated, kept losing his place mid-sentence. "She tried to kill us," he said. "I couldn't stop her." When we asked where she was now, Evan looked around like we'd moved her. Mike found a tender knot on his scalp and said he likely had a mild concussion. He told me to call it in. I got 911 after 2 drop tries. I gave mile markers, said we were on the dirt detour paralleling 93, Single vehicle on its side, one with possible concussion, passenger unaccounted for. Dispatch said response was an hour and a tow couldn't reach us until daylight. We set triangles because the detour's curve hit us. Tom walked 50 yards each way with his mag light to warn anyone creeping along. All our hazards pulsed in the dark. Dispatch told us to stay put and not climb deeper into the rocks unless we heard someone calling. Mike kept Evan awake. Date, location, who the president is, and Evan nailed some and blanked others. When Mike asked for Sarah's description, Evan said black hoodie, brown hair in a braid, Converse, 5'4" maybe. I wrote it down in my logbook. 10 minutes passed. No voices, no movement, just the pings of cooling metal. We kicked around that Sarah bailed and ran, but picked up by who? The only lights for miles were ours. Tom said the detour felt wrong. No road work ahead back on the main line, no flaggers, arrows were plywood with spray paint, and the barrels looked too clean. It all felt thrown together. Evan asked for his phone. It was in his back pocket, screen cracked. His hands shook, so I scrolled his recent calls for him. "Call Sarah," he said. I tapped the number. It rang, and then a generic voicemail. I left a message saying where we were, and to shout if she could hear us. Mike told Evan he needed a hospital. Evan shook his head. "I'm waiting for police," he said. "I have to tell them the truth about Sarah." An hour later, the first cruiser rolled up the dirt with 2 deputies, and the ambulance tucked behind, lights cutting hard edges over the rocks. They split us fast, me and Tom by the tractor, Mike by his sedan, Evan on a backboard near the wash. EMTs collared him and started vitals. A deputy asked me to walk him through everything from the red lights to the call. I kept it straight. Detour, veer, rollover, no passenger we could find. He wrote without looking up and asked again about the detour signs. They took statements, checked times against our logs, and another deputy got on the radio about the construction. He came back saying there wasn't any active road work scheduled after 10 p.m. on that stretch, which made Tom bristle, but the sergeant shut it down with a hand and said maybe the county put something up last minute. They flagged 2 more vehicles and turned them back to the highway. A K9 unit rolled in, and the handler worked the dog along the wash and into the rocks. Mike told the trooper he was a paramedic and he'd done a field check. Mild concussion likely, no obvious breaks. Evan kept asking for Sarah by name. The trooper crouched and said, "Tell me what she looks like." And Evan repeated the hoodie, the braid, the Converse. When pressed, he added a red jacket and winced like the memory stung. The trooper asked where they'd come from. "Gas and Alamo," Evan said, and a deputy peeled off to try to pull footage. When the dog didn't hit, they widened the circle and had us run the timeline again. Mike said he'd walk the rocks right away. No tracks, no shouting. I mentioned I'd left a voicemail on the number labeled Sarah and offered to show it. The deputy took my phone and logged the time. Another trooper ran Mike's plates and ran ours. Nobody was accusatory, just clinical. The sergeant said head injuries scramble the last 10 minutes and passengers get lost in the story. We stood back while they crawled the site. One deputy held up a shard that looked like taillight plastic. Another bagged the hat Evan had lost. EMTs cleaned a scalp cut and taped gauze. Evan refused transport twice until the sergeant said he wasn't under arrest, but he was going in because they needed scans, and he needed not to wander if Sarah showed. "I'm not leaving," Evan said. "She's going to come back here." They loaded him anyway, still arguing. By 2:30, they had grid marks in chalk on the dirt and ribbons on 3 scrub bushes. The helicopter refueled and came back low, then peeled off south. Dispatch radioed from the Alamo station. The clerk remembered a girl in a red jacket with Evan buying chips and a soda around 11. They printed a still where you could see the sleeve and a braid over her shoulder, but the face was turned. so he really hadn't been alone, and it shut everyone up. Before they cleared us, the sergeant asked us to stick around to guide any other traffic off the detour if someone wandered in, and to wait for the tow note for morning. He said these cases have a pattern. A fight, one storms off, the driver crashes from distraction, then can't account for minutes because the brain blanks. She likely bailed before the detour, he said, or walked away in the confusion. We'll find her footprint somewhere. He handed me a card and told me to call if that voicemail connected. We sat in the cab after they left, triangles still blinking. Tom wouldn't start the engine. He said the cones looked new. Around 4, we eased to the highway. Both lanes open, no barrels. We parked at a turnout and grabbed an hour of sleep with the phone on loud. At 9, we rolled back to check the site in daylight. The wash looked smaller. At the cutoff, Tom bent and lifted women's sunglasses, black frames, one arm scratched, sitting right where the tire marks cut in. They hadn't been there last night. I bagged them, called the substation, turned them in, kept driving north, never heard back, wondering who placed them and why. About 2 years ago, me and my partner Sam decided to have a yard sale at our RV spot in a big retirement community park outside Phoenix. We'd been living on the road for a while and had accumulated way too much stuff for our small space. The weekend weather was perfect, and we set up tables with clothes, electronics, books, and kitchen items we didn't need anymore. We had steady traffic all day Saturday, with lots of friendly neighbors and people from outside the park stopping by. Everything was going great. We were making good money, and people were finding things they actually wanted. Around 7 in the evening, we started packing up the remaining items to continue the sale on Sunday morning. I was counting out 10s and 5s into a zip bag. Nothing fancy, just a labeled quart bag, while Sam chatted with a couple who were bargaining over an old coffee grinder. They left smiling, and I felt that nice tired buzz you get when a plan actually works. We broke down 2 of the folding tables and leaned them against the side of the rig. I kept the nicer stuff inside the RV and left a plastic tote with random cords and chargers under the awning, just for the morning. Bad idea, yeah, I know. But the park is mostly retirees, and honestly, it felt safe. A white SUV drove by slow, like they were still shopping from the road. I waved. They didn't wave back. I remember clocking the dented rear fender and thinking I'd seen it earlier, but at that point I was mostly thinking about pizza. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand how tight everything is in an RV. One door, a narrow hallway, bedroom in back. If someone's in the doorway, you can't really pass without touching them. There's no around. I mention it because it matters. We wrapped a tarp around the last 2 boxes, and I pushed them just under the step. Sam said, "We'll pull these in at sunrise. No one's gonna care." And I believed him. The sun was low, and the park was in that quiet phase where you hear TVs through thin walls. An older guy on a golf cart slowed and said, "Good turnout today?" Sam told him we did all right. The guy nodded and kept rolling. Little stuff like that. Normal, boring, exactly what we wanted. Sam went to take down the directional signs we'd posted around the park while I finished cleaning up and putting things back inside our RV. We had a few last-minute browsers looking through the leftover stuff, but they left when we said we were closing for the day. After getting everything secured inside, we locked up and settled in for a quiet evening. We were sitting in our tiny living area around 9 o'clock, watching Netflix on Sam's laptop and talking about how successful the day had been. That's when we heard our front door open, which was impossible because we always lock it immediately after coming inside. I said, "Did you lock it?" And he said, "You saw me." And I did. We both froze. You know that split second where you're trying to decide if the sound is the wind or the hinge or your brain? Then we heard it again. The latch kissing metal. The soft bump of the door against the stop. Sam put the laptop down without pausing the show, which felt weirdly loud even on mute. He held up a hand like, "Wait." From the couch you can see the kitchen but not the door, and I swear I could feel air change, like desert night pushing into our cooled box. We didn't move for 3 breaths. Then we heard a foot scrape on the rubber mat by the entry. "Someone's in here," I whispered. Sam mouthed, "Yeah." He set his coffee cup on the tiny sink ledge, carefully, no clink, and stood up. I grabbed my phone off the counter and checked the lock screen like that would help. It didn't. The hallway felt like a mile. The bathroom door was cracked, mirror catching a sliver of our faces. I don't know why, but I picked up the car keys from the hook, like I was going somewhere, then set them down, 'cause that jingle would give us away. We heard a drawer slide in the front area, the shallow junk drawer sound. Coins, batteries. Someone was opening it like they belonged there. The sound of footsteps in our narrow hallway made it clear that someone had actually gotten inside our RV. Sam grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer while I quietly moved toward the bedroom at the back of the coach. We could hear whoever it was moving around in the front section, opening cabinets and drawers like they were searching for something specific. I called the park's emergency security line while Sam positioned himself where he could see down the hallway. The dispatcher said a security guard would be there in just a few minutes and told us to stay locked in the bedroom until they arrived. The sounds continued for what felt like forever, with the intruder clearly going through our belongings. When the golf cart lights washed across our blinds and the guard knocked, Sam shouted that we were in the back and the door was open. The footsteps in the front froze, then a quick shuffle like someone trying not to make noise. The guard, older guy from earlier, called out, "Security, don't move," and the radio on his shoulder crackled. Another guard stepped in behind him with a hand on his belt. They swept the flashlight across the dinette and kitchen, saw the junk drawer hanging open, saw my purse half dumped on the bench. "We're in the bedroom," I said, and the older guard told us to stay put. We heard him flick the bathroom door with his knuckles. Nothing. Then he pulled the shower curtain fast, and there was this hollow thud and a yelp, like someone bracing for a hit and losing. "Hands where I can see," the guard said, tone flat, like he'd done this before. They brought him out by the elbow, this young guy in a black hoodie and dusty sneakers, maybe 20-something, head ducked. His pockets were bulging stupidly, a zip-baggy edge poked out. The guard had him stand by the sink and empty everything onto the counter. Our spare key fob, Sam's multi-tool, a roll of quarters from the cash box, 2 USB sticks, one of my earrings, just one, why? Then the older guard took a small pry bar from the hoodie pocket and laid it down with a set of lockpicks tied together with a twist tie. "That's not good," he said. The kid mumbled that it was just for work. He was a handyman. He said he wasn't stealing. He was borrowing. His story slid around like he was picking one that might land. "Why were you in our shower?" I asked, which came out sharper than I meant. He said he'd come in earlier during the sale to use our bathroom and must have dozed off in the shower 'cause it was cool in there. He swore he didn't mean anything. He woke up and panicked. That kind of nonsense. The second guard glanced at the door frame and pointed at the clean scrape by the latch. "He popped it," he said to his partner, low. The older guard asked the kid his name and what space he was in. He gave a number that didn't exist. The guard radioed the front office to check the entry log. Every vehicle is scanned coming and going. And while we stood there listening to them confirm times, I stared at the pry bar like it would explain the feeling I'd had earlier watching that white SUV. The office came back. No exit for him after the sale ended, which meant he never left. He'd either been hiding behind someone's rig or in the laundry room alcove, or in one of the empty spots, watching lights go off. The guard said, "You've been in here before, huh?" And the kid shrugged like he couldn't help knowing where our junk drawer was. That tracked. He'd been one of the browsers around 6:30 who asked about phone chargers. I remembered his hoodie even though it was hot, 'cause I'd thought, who wears a hoodie here? He'd looked around like he wasn't really shopping, just mapping. He kept saying, "I just needed a place to crash," but his pockets said otherwise. The older guard had him sit on the step and keep his hands visible. "Management's calling PD," he said to us over his shoulder. Calm, like routine. Park management showed up with a clipboard and that frazzled look people get when they're trying to be in charge without making it worse. They took quick photos of the items on the counter, the door latch, the shower. The manager asked us to list anything else that looked touched, and I pointed at our small safe in the closet, still there, thank God, and the cash bag, which I had shoved in a cereal box. Not a great hiding spot, hindsight. He hadn't found it. The police arrived, 2 officers, one talking, one mostly watching, and they listened to the guards and the manager, and then to us. Sam just said it straight. We heard the door. We heard him going through things. We called. The officer asked the kid if the tools were his. He nodded. He said again that it was a misunderstanding, that he'd fallen asleep in the shower, that he didn't take anything. He was just holding. The officer didn't even react to that. They told him to stand, turned him, and cuffed him for breaking and entering in possession of burglary tools. One of the officers mentioned he matched a description from another RV park hit last month. Same pattern, community event, lots of cash floating around, people distracted, doors opening and closing all day so no one notices a stranger. You could see how it works. He watches what people bring in and out, who has weak locks, who stashes cash in obvious spots. "These doors are cake if you know what you're doing," the officer said, tapping our latch with a knuckle. The manager looked embarrassed and said they'd do a sweep of camera coverage and that patrols would step up. They asked if we wanted to press charges. I said yes before my brain caught up, because it felt like if we didn't, he'd just circle back tomorrow somewhere else. Sam nodded. The kid stared at the floor and kept chewing his lip. They bagged the tools and the stuff from our counter, had us sign a quick property sheet, and walked him out to the cruiser. A few neighbors had drifted onto their steps, robe belts tied, pretending not to look. After the taillights disappeared, the guards helped us check the door. The pry mark was small, almost nothing, but it was enough. The manager said the park would be upgrading night patrols and adding 2 cameras near the clubhouse and the perimeter fence. He apologized in that way managers do, like he's sorry, but also making a list. We nodded. We were already making our own list. First thing, a real deadbolt, not the flimsy latch that came with the RV. Second, a bar for the door so it can't swing even if unlocked. Third, an alarm that screams when the door opens at night, 'cause a simple beep isn't enough when you're asleep 10 feet away. We didn't sleep much after everyone left. We moved the safe to the floor and slid it under the bed frame. We pulled the couch cushions and looked for anything else out of place. We found a cabinet hinge loosened and tightened it. Stupid detail, but it made me feel like we were taking something back. In the morning, we took down what was left of our sale signs and boxed the rest for donation. We don't do yard sales anymore. If we want to get rid of stuff, we meet in public, and we don't bring strangers into our little space. We added 2 deadbolts and a door alarm, and I keep the cash somewhere that isn't a cereal box. People think because you can lock a door you're safe, and I used to think that too. But all it took was one kid with a pry bar, and a plan to show me how thin that line really was. When I was 17, I was totally swept up in the whole alternative culture scene. so the Green Valley Music Festival in Oregon seemed like a dream come true. I went with my friend Kate and her older sister, who was already a regular at these events. 3 days of music, camping, and spiritual seeking among like-minded people was exactly what my rebellious teenage soul needed. We pitched a cheap dome tent in the designated camping lot, dusty field, bathrooms and trailers that always seemed to be under maintenance, and bought the reusable cups they sold at the gate because they gave you $1 off refills, which felt like we were sticking it to the man, even though we obviously weren't. On the first afternoon, I got separated from Kate near a row of booths selling crystals and handmade soaps, and that's when this 30-something guy in white linen clothes stepped up like he had been waiting for me. He introduced himself as Marcus, said he was a truth seeker and philosopher, and he had that calm voice that makes you feel like you're being listened to, even when you're the one listening. He talked about the unity of all living things, criticized society's materialism. I remember him tapping the screen on someone's phone and calling it a pocket leash. And he told me about his mountain community in Colorado. He didn't flirt outright, which made it worse, honestly. He called me an enlightened soul and said he could open new horizons of consciousness. I laughed, nervous laugh, and told him I was just a barista/student, and he said that those labels only mattered to people who were still asleep. We ran into him again at a drum circle after sunset. He remembered my name without me repeating it and asked how the tent was holding up. Little things, but I noticed. Kate asked where he was camping and he said he didn't do tents anymore because the body sleeps best under sky. He had that way of holding eye contact a fraction too long, and when some drunk guy bumped my shoulder, Marcus moved me aside with 2 fingers, like it was nothing, like he already had permission to touch me. He asked what bands I liked, then pivoted into, "What's your purpose?" just like that. When I told him I hadn't figured it out yet, he said that was proof my inner compass was still uncorrupted, which sounded smart at the time, but now reads like bait. He talked a little about the commune's rhythms, sunrise meditation, time in the gardens, long hikes without phones. He mentioned the altitude like it was a badge. I noticed he never said, "We have a doctor," or "We have a truck," but he did say, "We have elders." He had an answer for everything, and when Kate teased him about the linen, he just smiled and said he wore white to be accountable for dirt. Marcus asked detailed questions the next day: my family, school, if I planned on college, how my parents felt about the system. He didn't say my parents were bad people. He said they were trapped in inherited narratives. He called traditional education transactional conditioning, which sounds like something I would have parroted in a Tumblr bio. He asked what made me angry and what made me feel safe, and when I hesitated, he said, "See, that gap? That's where the work is." He gave me his business card with the commune's address. No phone number, just an email and a little drawing of a mountain with a circle over it, and he invited me to visit when I was ready for true freedom. According to him, their community lived in harmony with nature, practiced organic farming and disciplines of attention, while money and careers didn't matter. He said there was a sliding contribution, not a fee, that aligned with capacity, and that sounded fair enough in the moment. He added that new people were paired with a guide for the first season so they didn't get overwhelmed, which I pictured like a mentor, but I didn't ask who picked the guide. The festival ended and we went home, the car smelling like dust and patchouli and kettle corn, and I kept replaying his phrases. The way he said, "You don't owe anyone a replica of their life." Back at the cafe in our small town, I pulled morning shifts and tried not to think about college stuff. Marcus's card sat in the pocket of my apron wrapped in a receipt like it was fragile. I googled the zip code on the cafe computer. I know, dumb. And it came up as a long stretch of county road with not much around. No surprise there. But I still caught myself daydreaming about irrigating terraces and reading by lantern light like some pioneer rebrand. A week after the festival, Marcus walked into the cafe like he'd been a regular for years. I was on register, hair pinned back with one of those plastic clips that always broke, and he said he was just passing through. He ordered hot water with lemon, of course, then stayed. All evening he talked about life in the commune, showing photos on a little printed stack, not his phone. Mountain ridges, a big garden with hoops over the rows, smiling people in simple clothes standing with their arms around each other. He said he missed our festival conversations and told me I was special, not like other girls my age, which is a sentence that lands differently when you're 17 and annoyed at your parents, and you've never had a 30-something say it like an observation instead of a pickup line. He asked when I was off and I said 9, and he said he could wait and drive me to the overlook to see the sky properly, and I said I had to close. He said, "Another time," and shifted right into logistics, like a salesman who senses a nibble. How they were preparing for winter, how they needed more hands to split wood and finish a root cellar, how their carpenter had just left because his mother was sick and we don't chain people, and if I wanted I could come with him when he headed back east in the morning. We'd be at the property by late Sunday if we didn't stop much. He said there was a bus station in town if I preferred a ticket. One way was simpler, and he could have someone meet me at the junction where the service ends. No bars past that point, so I wouldn't be alone on the last stretch. He said I could write to my parents from there and that freedom requires an act, and if I needed proof they weren't some cult, his word, I could talk to Elia, a woman close to my age who had chosen her own family and was thriving. I asked if my parents could call someone at the commune, and he said phones were for emergencies, and real conversation doesn't need intermediaries. I said I couldn't just leave without telling them, and he nodded like he respected it, then said, "Parents project their fear," and promised they'd understand my choice once they saw how happy and free I'd become. He kept his voice low and steady, that same too long eye contact, and one of my regulars, a retired math teacher, watched us over her tea in that way older people do when they're trying to decide if they should step in. Something about his insistence, how he kept compressing the timeline, how everything was now or never, made me uneasy, and I told him I needed time to think. He set his shoulders like I'd failed a test. "Time lets doubt grow," he said, then softened it with a smile and told me he believed in my courage. I said I'd email him if I had questions. He was clearly disappointed, like anyone would be who'd planned for a yes, but he slid a second business card across the counter and asked me not to delay the decision. After he left, I told my mom about the encounter and showed her the business card. She read the name New Dawn, and her face tightened. She opened her laptop at the kitchen table and started searching. Forums, old articles, a non-profit database, links kept stacking. It turned out New Dawn was a cult recruiting at festivals. Former members described forced labor, isolation, and pressure. Then we found his photo under his real name, David Reynolds, with charges for fraud and unlawful imprisonment. Same eyes, same white clothes. Mom said that is him and printed the page. She kept reading. Survivors said he asked about family and purpose, then called leaving an act of courage. New arrivals had IDs taken for safekeeping and rides controlled by a few men. People who tried to leave got accountability circles that felt like threats. I thought about the one-way ticket and felt sick. Mom stacked the printouts and said we are not guessing anymore. Now, before I explain what happened next, I am not a runaway type. I had a job and a coach who expected me, and I like routine. That probably saved me. Routine. Mom called the police non-emergency line and an officer took a statement. I handed over both cards and told him what Marcus had said about leaving in the morning. My manager saved camera footage to a drive and gave it to him. He wrote a case number and said a detective would review it with the county task force. Mom emailed the festival organizers. She laid out the dates, the name, the photos, and the links. Next day they wrote back, New Dawn would be on their do not admit list and sent to security. She printed the email and stuck it on the fridge. She called Kate's mom, and Kate texted me WTF, I thought he was just a weirdo, and I said same. We told our co-workers so nobody gave information if a stranger came asking. For a week I was jumpy at work. Every tall guy in a light shirt made my stomach flip. Twice I thought I saw him by the newspaper rack, but it was not him. He never came back, as far as I know. 2 days after the officer visit, an email hit the cafe account addressed to the young woman from Green Valley. My manager forwarded it without opening it. The subject line was clarity. I did not click. We sent it to the detective. He said the sender used a privacy service, do not reply, and he put a patrol car by closing for a few nights. There was one more thing that slammed the point home. A woman messaged me through a burner Instagram and asked to talk. We called her on speaker at the kitchen table. She had been at New Dawn for 10 months. She said the first weeks were hugs and chores. Then it was dawn to dark labor and cleanses where you could not speak. Phones were for emergencies and yours would be stored so you could focus. Leaving meant a long walk to the highway, and sometimes the men followed in a truck telling you to get back. Now I understood why the charge said unlawful imprisonment. When I realized how close I had come, I kept watching the door every shift. Marcus never returned to our town, but I stayed ready for months. This experience taught me not to trust beautiful words from strangers and to be careful with anyone who tries to cut me off from family and friends. I learned that predators scan festivals for kids like me, tired of school and rules, and they talk like teachers so you do not see the sales pitch. Marcus had probably approached dozens of teenagers that weekend, throwing out lines and seeing who stayed to listen. What scares me most is how polished it was, how normal he seemed, because he did not act like a creep. He acted like a guide offering work and purpose. If my mom had not checked the name, I might have gotten in that car. I still go to shows, but now I keep my guard always up. During my senior year, our AP biology class took a field trip to a state forest preserve about an hour from school to study local ecosystems and collect plant samples. Mr. Rodriguez had done this trip for years, 20 kids in school-issued day packs, field notebooks, little plastic specimen bags clipped to our belts. The preserve had those wide gravel paths with colored blazes and mile markers, family-friendly on the brochure. And he kept saying, "Stick to the main trail, buddy system. We're guests out here." It was easy until the path bottlenecked where brush leaned in and branches snagged sleeves. Somebody up front went, "Did you see that?" And a couple of people swore they saw a person in the trees to our left. Mr. Rodriguez just waved it off, probably a hiker, maybe a ranger, and kept us moving because we were behind schedule on the transect. We weren't scared exactly, more curious, but there were little things that felt off if you were paying attention, like fresh boot scuffs sliding off the gravel into the undergrowth, and this torn corner of a mylar blanket caught on a blackberry cane. Mr. Rodriguez did the teacher voice, "Eyes on trail, folks," and pointed out a milkweed pod to get people refocused. I remember Jenna whispering to me that she didn't like the feeling of being watched. I told her it was probably deer. I said it like I knew what I was talking about. He stopped at a narrow bridge over a creek, made us count off 1, 2, and reminded everyone to meet at the meadow by noon for lunch and sorting. The movement in the bushes faded into a joke again, like, "Ooh, Bigfoot," and we went over leaf morphology while he talked about not crushing lichens. Normal field trip stuff. By late morning, we hit the picnic meadow. 2 metal tables, a bulletin board with sun-faded maps, a trash can chained to a post. The sun felt hotter there, wide open. We dropped packs, pulled out sandwiches, and started matching leaves to the laminated guide sheets. People argued about whether a stem was opposite or alternate, and Mr. Rodriguez did his patient grin like always. After 20 minutes, I was restless. The meadow was loud with everyone talking over each other, and I wanted quiet to write my notes. There was a side trail branching off, same colored blaze, narrower, and I figured I'd take a quick walk, grab a couple of samples from a different micro-habitat, and come right back. I told Ben I was going to check the spur, and he mumbled with his mouth full, "Don't be dumb, dude, 5 minutes," and pointed at his watch. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just didn't want to sit there watching Emily glue leaves crookedly for another hour. The side trail wound into thicker cover pretty fast. Still clearly marked, just single file now. Dirt with roots instead of gravel. The light dropped enough that it felt later than it was. I kept it practical. Counted paces, checked the blazes, looked back every so often so the return view would be familiar. My dad always said to do that. Turn and memorize the way back. I stopped twice to bag a leaf and jot a note. Wet edge habitat, moss on north sides, and the whole time I could still hear the faint chorus of my class across the meadow, just enough to anchor me. 10 minutes out, tops, then I'd spin around. I wasn't trying to miss the head count or make Mr. Rodriguez mad. Then I heard rustling off to my right, deeper in. Not wind and leaves random. Short bursts, then quiet. Then another short burst like someone testing their weight on deadfall. I froze and listened. I've scared squirrels before. This wasn't that. It had weight. I scanned between two big trunks where the ground dipped and saw nothing at first. I told myself it was a deer browsing. This preserve had signs about tick checks everywhere. So I waited, thinking if it was an animal it'd bolt when it caught my scent. Another rustle, closer now. I shifted 1 foot back on the trail to get ready to step out, and a woodpecker started up somewhere behind me, the only loud thing for a beat. I thumbed my phone out of habit, no bars, then slid it back, pulse climbing in this dumb way I was trying to ignore. The shape came into view in pieces. First a shoulder where the jacket hung loose, then the rest of the figure easing from behind a trunk like he didn't want to show himself all at once. He wasn't a ranger. No uniform, no day pack. His clothing looked wrong for a hike, dirty and torn, fabric gone shiny from wear like he'd slept in it too many times. He moved with this deliberate care, heel to toe, keeping trees between us until there weren't any left to hide behind. We were maybe 50 feet apart, 2 lines through scrub oak and young maples. When our eyes met, he froze and went so still, it felt like someone hit pause. He had long, greasy hair pushed behind his ears, a patchy beard that made his face look older than his eyes, and stains on his clothes that didn't read as simple mud to me. He didn't look drunk. He looked calculated, like he'd been watching to see if I was alone. For a few seconds, nothing happened except my brain trying to split into 2 plans. I knew the smart move was to back out slowly and put loud space between us. Get back to the meadow, get an adult. I also knew calling out might diffuse it if he was just a vagrant camping rough and we startled each other. I could still hear the class faintly, someone laughing big, probably Marco, and that sound kept me from doing something dumb like run and twist an ankle. I put my hands where he could see them and said, "Hey man, you good?" But the words came out quiet, too thin to carry. He didn't answer. He didn't blink either, not that I noticed. His eyes flicked once at the blaze on the tree, then back to me, like he understood exactly where we were. I took 1 step back onto the packed dirt of the trail and felt the heel land solid. "I'm with a group," I said louder, trying to make it sound like a fact that mattered. I wasn't trying to threaten. I wanted him to hear other voices in his head, to weigh whatever he was about to do against 20 teenagers and a teacher walking toward us. I kept my shoulders square so I didn't look like prey. You read things, right? And my right hand hovered near the whistle on my lanyard. He saw that. His gaze dropped, quick, then came back up. For a beat I thought he might turn away. And I'd do the thing you see in safety videos where you back straight out and report it, and it becomes a weird story you tell later about a guy living in the woods. Then the man suddenly changed direction and started moving directly toward me through the underbrush. I didn't wait to see if he'd call out or slow down. I turned and ran, not a sprint at first, just a hard, fast walk that flipped into a run the second I heard branches snapping behind me. The trail was a thin ribbon of packed dirt, and the edges were all roots and low snags that wanted my ankles, and I kept my eyes on the next blaze and the next step. He wasn't trying to be quiet. He crashed through brush like he didn't care who heard, and that told me two things at once. He wasn't scared of anyone finding out, and he didn't think he had to pace himself. I cut left around a rotted log, and it exploded under his foot a beat later. That sound put me into another gear I didn't know I had. I blew my whistle once, a sharp blast, and yelled, "Mr. Rodriguez!" so loud my throat hurt. No answer, just the echo of it knocked flat by trees. The trail kinked and I misjudged the corner, and my shoulder hit bark hard enough to spin me, and I kept going without looking back because if I looked I'd slow. He started moving smarter too, taking straight lines from blaze to blaze while I stayed on the path. I saw him peripherally once, cutting between two pines, and he ate 10 feet of distance in what felt like a blink. I forced myself to count, 10 strides, then lift higher, 10 more, and I tried to pick my feet up and over the laced roots instead of stomping into them. My pack bounced and slapped between my shoulders, and I yanked the chest strap tighter while running, hands clumsy. I hit a patch of loose stuff and slid downhill a step, caught myself with one hand, popped up, and found the trail widening. That helped. I took the middle like a lane, and my breathing turned into that hot saw blade sound that means you're at the red line. I heard him right behind, closer than before, and then farther, like he'd cut wrong and gotten tangled, and I pressed the advantage without getting fancy. The light started opening up ahead. I recognized the run out to the meadow from the texture under my shoes. The dirt went back to gravel, first a sprinkle of it, then the steady crunch that meant flat ground soon. I blew the whistle again, 2 short blasts, and someone shouted back, thin and surprised. I burst from the trees into the open and almost tripped on the lip of the gravel. The class was there at the tables, and Mr. Rodriguez was standing with his hand up blocking the sun like binoculars, and then he was moving toward me fast, and I cut directly to him. I got out something like, "Guy, on the spur, chasing, dirty clothes, 50 feet, and pointed back at the tree line. He didn't ask for a second version. He turned and did that clap he used to get attention and said, "Everyone to me now," in his coach voice. He told Ben and Jenna to take a head count. He put his arm out and guided me behind him without making a show of it, like I was just another kid to be positioned. I kept my eyes on the gap where I'd come through because part of me expected the guy to step out right then. He grabbed the radio from his pack, one of those loaners from the ranger station, and keyed it. School group at Meadow North, possible threat. Adult male, disheveled, aggressive pursuit, moving east on Blue Spur. Request assistance. The radio cracked back with an acknowledgement and an ETA. He told everyone, "We're staying together," and had us bring the specimen buckets and packs into a tight pile so nothing was left around for tripping. "No one wanders, no one plays hero," he said. 2 of the kids started to say something about what they'd seen earlier, and he held up a finger without turning around. "Eyes up. Quiet." We waited like that for maybe 3 minutes. Nothing came out of the trees. A breeze flattened the grasses toward the gap and lifted nothing else. I could hear my heartbeat in the side of my head. Mr. Rodriguez asked me, low, if the man had a weapon. I said I didn't see one. He nodded once like that simplified what he was going to do next, but didn't change the plan. When the radios cracked again, they were closer. You could hear engine before you saw uniforms. 2 rangers came up the main path at a fast walk, one holding a clipboard, one already unspooling tape from a pocket roll. They asked me for a quick description. I gave it. Direction? I pointed. Distance? I guessed. Behavior? Came at me direct. They didn't waste time explaining. They went in. We couldn't see the search, but we could track it by the radio language. Blue spur, moving east. Negative on contact. Stand by. And the way the tape got stretched across the side trail entrance in a single clean stripe. A 3rd ranger showed up from the meadow's far side to stay with us. He told Mr. Rodriguez they'd had reports lately. People camping where they shouldn't. Some mental health stuff. Mostly keep to themselves. But we don't assume. And he had us shift 20 yards back from the tree line and sit on our packs so we didn't mill around and panic. He stayed standing, angled so he could watch the gap and us at the same time. After a while, the radio voice said, "Campsite located," and then a description. Tarp strung low, a flattened blanket, a ring of scorched dirt with a coffee can in the middle, food wrappers stuffed into a plastic bag, footprints leading in and out from angles that weren't on the map. No ID, no person. They found a pocket knife stuck into a log, a worn jacket rolled for a pillow, a stack of park brochures greasy from fingers. The ranger with us murmured, "All right," like he'd expected that, and told us we were leaving via the fire road instead of the spur. Mr. Rodriguez had us stand and count again. The group moved as one, quiet now, even the kids who always joked. We took the long way out with the rangers flanking us and the tape behind us, and the bus driver did a double take when he saw the uniforms. Back at school, there was paperwork and phone calls, and an impromptu lecture about situational awareness that didn't feel preachy because nobody argued. I turned in my bagged leaves with everyone else and washed my hands longer than made sense. The rangers never found the man. They said it happens, that people slip between trees faster than you think, that most are harmless but unpredictable. I don't dramatize it when I tell it now. I just stick to the order. How he shifted toward me, how he chose the straight line, how the distance disappeared until I had to decide to move before he did. And then I think about the piece that's not dramatic at all, the simple math of it, that if I'd tripped once more or waited to blow the whistle or picked the wrong bend on that spur, we might have had a different conversation by a picnic table while someone sealed a campsite in evidence bags. After moving to Denver for graduate school, I felt isolated and lonely since my boyfriend Alex had stayed in Boston to finish his program. The first weeks were just me and a small sublet with a wobbly table and this constant quiet that felt like pressure in my ears, so I filled it with podcasts and forum tabs, and one night I ended up on this online group for detective fiction. Nerdy, I know, but it felt like something familiar where I could actually talk to people about cases and red herrings instead of trying to make small talk at orientation mixers. I posted about a new release and some classic procedural stuff I loved, and this guy named Rick responded with a long comment about chain of custody and how most books get blood spatter all wrong. And honestly, it was impressive without being condescending, which is rare online. He said he worked narcotics out of Phoenix, and the way he wrote about the job, short shifts turning long, paperwork that never ended, the boring parts no one talks about, made it feel real in a way that didn't sound like bragging. We kept going back and forth, and then it drifted off the books and into daily life, like he'd tell me about being dead on his feet after a rotation, or how he hated missing bedtime with his kids. And I'd talk about statistics class and figuring out the bus routes and how everything here was dry and bright and plain weird compared to Boston. Now, before I explain what happened next, You need to understand the tone he had, which was steady, patient, a little dad jokey, and if I asked something technical, he'd explain it plainly and never made me feel dumb. He mentioned a wife, Amber, 2 kids, a quiet neighborhood, and how the job was a lot less car chases than TV made it look. I wasn't looking for anything beyond conversation. It was honestly just nice to type and have someone answer quickly with complete sentences. And when you're alone in a new city, that counts for more than you think. He'd ask about my research track, cognitive assessment, nothing glamorous. And he'd say stuff like, "That's exactly the kind of thing detectives need but no one funds." Which, okay, flattery works. But it didn't feel gross. If anything, the weirdest thing was how he'd sometimes vanish for a day or two, and then come back with a "sorry, long surveillance." Which, fine, that tracks. But it happened just enough that it stuck in my head. He sent photos after a thread about favorite procedural screw-ups. One was a squad car in a garage I assumed was a motor pool. Another was a badge on his palm. Another was a duty belt laid out on a table with a notebook and a pen clip that was bent like it had been chewed. Nothing cinematic, just practical shots you'd expect from a guy who lives at work half the time. We fell into this routine. Morning check-ins, late-night messages, dumb memes that were only funny at 1 a.m., and 4 months slid by. Alex knew about Rick in that low-stakes way where he'd be like, "Oh, your detective friend again," and I'd say, "We're arguing about whether that book ending made any sense." And we both left it there because he had his lab cohort friends, and I had this. When Rick said he'd be in Denver for an interagency narcotics conference, 3 days, back-to-back panels, death by PowerPoint, his words, and asked if I wanted to grab coffee, I said yes, like it was the most normal thing in the world, because it felt normal by then. We met at a downtown cafe that was quiet enough you didn't have to lean in, which I appreciated. And he looked exactly how I'd pictured. Late 30s, neat haircut, tired eyes, but friend-tired, not unsafe-tired. He tapped a leather wallet open for a second, like a magician's flash, and I saw a photo, a seal, an ID. Again, nothing flashy, just official looking in that DMV way. And honestly, I didn't inspect it beyond that because who does? He asked me about my methods class like he'd actually read the syllabus. And then he told a couple of work stories that were more about bureaucracy than busts. The kind of thing where you can hear frustration without overt bitterness. He never badmouthed his wife. He mentioned the kids' soccer practice and how he tries not to bring work home. And I believed him because the details were boring enough to be true. We split the check because I insisted. I didn't want this to be weird. And we walked out into the early evening like you do when you don't want to end a good conversation by standing up too fast. The first meeting went perfectly. Just easy talk, a nice rhythm, nobody overshared. And by the time we got to my car, I was mostly relieved, like, okay, the person in my phone is the person in real life. He stood with his hand on the roof while I unlocked it and said something like, "I'm glad this wasn't awkward." And I laughed and said, "Same." And then he moved in like he was going to kiss me. It wasn't aggressive, more like a quick decision he thought would land. But my stomach dropped anyway because it didn't make any sense. I stepped back and said, "Rick, no, we're not doing that. We both have people. This is not that." And he stopped immediately, palms out, and said, "I misread it. I'm sorry. That's on me." And he actually looked embarrassed, which I appreciated, but also I just wanted to get in my car and go home and not think too hard about it. There was tension, obviously. I said, "We're good. Just don't put me in that spot." And he said, "Totally fair." And we did the awkward wave goodbye where you both aim for casual and overshoot. Driving back, I replayed it too many times, checking my own tone all night like I'd somehow led him on by being friendly, which I hate that I did, but that's where my brain went. I told Alex the basics, coffee with forum friend, good talk, and left out the end because I didn't want to turn a mistake into a fight, and also because nothing had happened, not technically, and I figured it was fixable. I set a boundary, he apologized. We move on. Clean process, minimal fallout. Over the next few days, he sent apologies, not walls of text, just short messages spaced out like he didn't want to pressure me. I'm sorry. Misread signals. Won't happen again. Then, I value our conversations, and I'd hate to lose that. I'll keep it respectful. He said he'd been away from home too long. Conferences mess with his head. Dumb excuses, but he called them excuses, not reasons, which mattered to me. I replied once, okay, and let it sit. He didn't push. He sent a photo of a conference badge on a table with hotel coffee. Looked terrible, and I thumbs-upped it and said, enjoy the panels, and he wrote, enjoy is generous, which made me smile in spite of myself. By day 3, he added, if you ever feel uncomfortable, say so, and I'll back off entirely. Which is basic decency, sure, but it landed because most people don't spell it out. I didn't fully relax. There was still that sour note when I replayed the lean in by the car, but I wanted the version of this that worked. We'd had months of good talk, and the truth was, Denver still felt big and empty between classes, and the idea of losing one of the few easy routines I had made me stubborn. He promised it wouldn't happen again. I hoped we could return to comfortable friendship. A month later, he said he'd be back in Denver and asked if we could meet as old friends. And I said yes, because I wanted the reset, and because I thought maybe the awkward part had burned off, and we could get back to the routine that helped me get through long study days. We picked a different cafe, brighter, more people, and I kept it quick. Coffee, half an hour, then I had to run to campus, which was true. He was all polite and neutral at first, asking about exams, joking about the altitude again, and then it slid the same way by the door when we stood to leave. He stepped too close, hand brushing my elbow, and said, "No harm in a proper goodbye." And I pulled back and said, "There is, actually." And I watched his face shift like he decided something. That's when he told me the story about a dealer he'd caught with fake messages, how they made it look like the suspect's girlfriend was cheating. And he described the confrontation like it was a clever tactic, not cruel, ending with, "People show themselves when they think they've been betrayed." I said, "That's messed up." And he smiled a little and said, "It worked." And the way he looked at me wasn't friendly. I said, "We're done," paid my half, and left without waiting for a response. I blocked him everywhere that night. Forum account, texting app, email, then went around and tightened my settings on everything because it felt like the smart move. He switched to a new handle the next day, just to apologize. Then another when I blocked that. Then a third that used a photo from a thread I'd started months ago, which made me realize he'd been saving things. I told Alex the whole thing this time, including the kiss attempt and the weird threat story, and he was angry but practical. Document everything, save screenshots, tell campus security if he shows up. I started a folder, wrote dates, kept it boring and factual. 2 nights later, someone buzzed my building and hung up when I answered. I went to the window and saw a car I didn't recognize idling at the corner. I didn't go outside. He found my phone number again from a different area code and texted my exact address with a question mark. Then, "Do you like that part of town?" I hadn't given him my address. I felt my scalp prickle and called 911, and by the time a unit cruised the block, the car was gone, and I had nothing to show except the text. I went to a precinct the next morning with my folder. The desk officer took my statement, told me to seek a protection order if it escalated, and when I said the guy was a detective out of Phoenix, he raised his eyebrows and said, "You sure?" I said I'd seen an ID. He said, "File anyway." I filed anyway. He showed up at my house on a Saturday afternoon, broad daylight, hands visible, like he'd rehearsed being harmless. I opened the door on the chain and he said, "Just want to clear the air." And I said, "Leave." And he said, "I can wait." And I said I was calling the police right then, and began reading my address into the phone so he could hear it. He looked past me like he was memorizing the layout, then stepped back and walked to his car without hurrying. He texted from another new number before I'd hung up. "Why are you acting scared of me?" The next week he walked into my workplace, student services desk, wearing a dress shirt, no badge in sight, and I had 2 students waiting for forms, so I kept my voice level and said, "Can I help the next person?" He leaned on the counter like we were on a date and said, "Lunch?" I said, "You have to go." And he said, "Say yes, or I'll make a scene." Not loud, just flat, and I could feel the student assistant's eyes on me. I handed him a campus map and said, "Please leave, or I'll call security." He left then, smiling like we shared a joke. When I told him by text, I used a burner app at that point, that Alex wanted me to cut contact, he replied, "Alex doesn't know you the way I do." And when I didn't answer, he followed with, "You love me. You can be my girl when I'm in town. He never has to know." I typed, "No," and then blocked that number and the 3 after that. He started sending explicit descriptions, like he thought being graphic would flip a switch. I screenshot, logged, blocked, repeated. I changed my main email. He found the new one. I changed my forum handle. He found it in a day because of my post style, his words. He said, "We fit because we're the same brain." And I started to realize the whole detective thing gave him a template for persistence that didn't feel like fantasy to him. It felt like work. The harassment only stopped by accident. I dropped my phone at the bus stop one rainy morning, screen cracked spiderweb style, dead on arrival at the repair place. I bought a cheap replacement to get through the week, moved my SIM, reinstalled apps, and didn't think about how that reset would lift old blocks. By evening, every number he'd ever used was live again, and they stacked up like hail. Missed calls, voicemails, texts that hopped from pleading, to threats, to pity, to plans. I turned the phone off and slept in my roommate's room with the door locked. She was out of town, I had her permission. And in the morning, there were 21 new messages, even with the phone off all night. Because voicemail exists, whether you're ready for it or not. I took the phone and my folder to a different precinct and said, "This is escalated." They were better. Took copies, gave me a victim advocate's card, logged addresses. The advocate said, "Change your routines. Don't respond. Document." I did all of that. He still found angles, new emails, new social accounts with my face, fake DMs to classmates where I supposedly admitted cheating on Alex. I held steady because there wasn't a smart alternative. I tightened everything. I didn't walk alone. I told professors. I told my landlord. I told Alex, and we agreed he'd come out as soon as he could. But then his schedule shifted and my lease was ending in 2 months. And the cheapest answer was also the cleanest one. Pack, finish the semester, and move. So I moved to a different city. I think about how a conversation can turn into a lever someone uses, and how I dismissed the little flags because the talk was good, and the pictures looked real, and I wanted a friend more than I wanted to be suspicious. And yeah, I wish I'd cut it sooner, but mostly I hope this reads like procedure, because that's what helped. Save evidence, say no clearly, tell people, make noise, and if you have to, leave. Even if it feels unfair to be the one who moves. About 15 years ago, when I was 12 and my little sisters Emma and Sophia were 9 and 7, We spent most summer days riding our bikes around our Phoenix suburb while Mom was at work. Our neighborhood was pretty safe, with wide streets and not much traffic during the day. We had this game where we'd try to spot license plates with matching numbers or letters and call them out to each other. That particular afternoon, we'd been riding for hours and were heading home when a dark blue sedan passed us going the opposite direction. I noticed the license plate started with the number 77, so I called it out, and we all laughed and tried to tag each other like we always did. I remember thinking we should stick to the quieter streets because the heat off the asphalt made everything look wavy and drivers got lazy around corners, and also because Sophia's chain had slipped earlier and I didn't want her to crash again. About 10 minutes later, that same car appeared again, but now it was coming up behind us. It didn't blow past like normal cars do. It hung there, which felt weird right away, like when someone stands too close in a line. I told Emma to keep to the bike lane, what there was of it, and Sophia to stay right behind me, and I did that shaky laugh where you pretend you didn't notice anything. The sedan eased closer, engine low, and I caught a glimpse of the driver in the side mirror. Glasses, thinning hair, plain shirt. Nothing that would stick out in your memory if you saw him in a grocery store. He had his passenger window down, and his arm resting there, tapping the door with 2 fingers, like he had time to kill. When he edged up beside us, I moved a little so I'd be between him and Sophia, because that was just automatic for me even at 12. He said something I couldn't make out at first over our tires buzzing on the concrete, so I yelled to Emma to turn on Cypress since it cut toward home and had fewer cars. Plus, I knew that street sloped toward the wash, and that stuck in my head from when we'd toss rocks down there to hear them ping off the concrete. The driver slowed down and pulled alongside us, matching our speed instead of passing. I could see it was a middle-aged man wearing glasses, and he'd rolled down his passenger window. He was shouting something about asking for directions, but we kept pedaling and didn't stop to talk to him. That's when he started driving really close to Emma, who was in front of all of us. The car was so close I was afraid he was going to hit her bike or run her off the road. Suddenly, the man reached his arm out of the window and grabbed onto Emma's handlebars, trying to force her to stop. Emma started screaming and struggling to keep control of her bike, but it was really hard to steer with someone holding on. I yelled at him to let go. I remember it came out high and panicked, and I told Emma, "Brake! Brake!" while also shouting at Sophia to stay behind me, and it all came out as this messy string of words. He kept pace exactly, like he'd practiced, and the tire of his car kissed Emma's back wheel hard enough that it wobbled. He was saying something like, hold up, I just need..." And I cut him off, yelling "no" over and over. I glanced up and saw no other cars, no adults outside, just that long empty stretch and the gated backyards with cinder block walls. And I thought about how Mom had told us to find other people if anything felt off, which wasn't helpful because there weren't any people. I jammed my brakes, skidding a little to swing toward his door, and banged my handlebar against it on purpose, metal on paint, loud, and he flinched but didn't let go of Emma. She was crying, saying, "Stop, stop," and trying not to tip, and Sophia had that hiccup cry going, calling my name, not sure if she should ditch her bike or kick his car or what. The car drifted right, squeezing Emma toward the curb, and I realized he wanted her stopped in a spot with no driveways. There weren't any on that block, which meant he'd thought about where. I started yelling as loud as I could and pedaling toward the car, trying to help Emma, while Sophia was crying and calling for help. Luckily, we were on a street that had a steep slope down to a concrete drainage canal that was usually dry in the summer. Emma jerked her handlebars toward the slope, and the man couldn't hold on without losing control of his car. All 3 of us rode down into the canal where the car couldn't possibly follow us. The man stopped his car at the edge and looked down at us for several minutes, but then he started his engine and drove away. We stayed hidden in the canal for almost half an hour, too scared to come back up to street level. When we finally felt safe enough to climb out, the blue car was nowhere in sight. I checked the street in both directions and made Emma and Sophia wait while I listened for an engine. Nothing. Just heat and that hollow echo from the canal. We pushed our bikes up the slope, got onto the sidewalk, and I told them to stay tight on me. We cut down cypress, then birch, taking the turns fast because I didn't want to be visible on the long straight stretches. I kept glancing back, half expecting the sedan to slide out from a cross street. We hit 2 stop signs and didn't fully stop at either. Our house was 3 blocks in, and when we finally turned into our cul-de-sac, I told Sophia to get the door while I pulled the garage handle. We ditched the bikes inside and locked it. Mom was in the kitchen with her work laptop open, headset off, hair tied up, and she looked up like she knew something was wrong before we said anything. I blurted out that a man in a dark blue sedan grabbed Emma's handlebars, and Emma held her hands up showing the red marks where her skin had rubbed the grips, and Sophia kept saying he was gonna take her, in that small voice. Mom said, "Hold on," and dialed 911 right there, put it on speaker, and had me repeat it to the dispatcher because she wanted it exact. I told them the plate started with 77, Arizona plate, blue sedan, older guy with glasses, light shirt, grabbing the handlebars through the window, and that we got away by going down into the drainage canal off Cypress. The dispatcher asked if anyone was hurt, and Emma said her wrist hurt, but she could move it. Mom locked the deadbolt and told us, "Stay inside, don't go near the windows." As soon as Mom hung up, she said, "We're not waiting around," and grabbed her keys. It made sense to me. If he was still circling, we might spot the car faster than anyone else, and I knew the turns he'd taken. We piled into the minivan, me in the passenger seat so I could point, Emma and Sophia buckled in the back. Mom drove slow along the long loop that ran behind our block, then the strip where the canal paralleled the road, scanning every parked car. We checked the grocery lot, the park lot, and the 2 dead-end cul-de-sacs where people sometimes turned around. Every blue car made my stomach jump, but none were the one. We passed Cypress twice, and I showed Mom the exact spot where the curb dipped toward the canal, tire skids still visible from Emma's swerve. Mom parked there a second, hazards on, and we scanned backyards for a blue sedan tucked behind a gate. Pointless, but we did it. An hour in, the heat inside the van felt stale, and Mom said we should circle the main road one more time. We watched the on-ramps, the small strip mall, even the car wash bays. Nothing. After another slow pass past the neighborhood school, Mom said, "We're going home for the report." And I nodded because my throat was tight from describing him out loud over and over. On the way back, I saw a dark sedan 2 streets over at a 4-way and sat forward. But when we turned toward it, it was a different grille, different plate. We let it go. It felt like chasing smoke. 2 officers met us on our front step about an hour later. One took notes, the other walked the curb near the canal slope like he was measuring angles with his eyes. They asked the same questions twice to see if our answers changed. I get why. I told them 77 on the plate, dark blue sedan, passenger window already down, man with glasses, short hair, maybe mid-40s to 50s, calm voice, said he needed directions, and that he matched our speed and grabbed. Emma said how his fingers wrapped around the rubber and how the bike wobbled when the car nudged her tire. Sophia said he kept leaning over the passenger seat like he was going to open the door. The note-taking officer looked at Mom and said, "We'll patrol, but with a partial plate it's tough. There are a lot of blue sedans." And then to us, "You did the right thing getting to a place a car can't go." He told Mom, "Don't let them ride alone for now," and handed her a card with the report number. We signed the statement. When he left, he said, If you see that car again, call immediately. Don't follow. Get to people." We all nodded like it was a drill. That night, Mom taped the car to the fridge and set a rule. Bikes only with her or in the backyard, no exceptions. She said she'd talk to the neighbors and the school. She walked the canal path with our next-door neighbor's teen son while we watched from the window, just in case the guy had ditched something. They came back with nothing. Before bed, she checked the locks twice and told us to keep our shoes by the door. It wasn't drama, just steps. We never saw that man or his dark blue car again, and for years afterward I watched plates like it was a habit I couldn't stop. Every parking lot, every light, looking for 77 at the start, and sometimes I'd follow a block just to make sure it wasn't him before turning off. Mom started driving us to school the next morning and kept doing it until we got old enough to push back, and even then she made us text when we left and when we arrived. There were no updates from the police beyond still looking, and we never heard about other kids in our area having the same thing happen, which doesn't mean it didn't, just that nobody told us. I still run the what-ifs in my head. What if there hadn't been that canal? What if he'd cut us off instead of pacing? What if I hadn't yelled or banged his door? What if Emma had fallen? Because all of it came down to a split second, and a slope most people don't think about when they ride past it. I know it wasn't bravery. It was knowing the shape of our streets and taking the only exit that made sense. I tell my own kid now about picking the place a car can't go, about noise, about details that matter if you have to explain something fast to someone who can help. We never got a name or a case closure, just that empty space where an ending should go, and a habit of scanning for 77 that never fully stops. Last summer, I was driving to my 20-year high school reunion in Georgia, with about 3 hours left to go when I decided to stop at a small rest area to use the bathroom and stretch my legs. It was around 10:30 p.m. The highway was quiet, and the place was the basic kind. One low building, 2 vending machines, and a few dim lights. The lot was empty and poorly lit, but after 6 hours in the seat, I needed the break. I teach 7th grade back in Alabama, so I plan everything, and I follow my own rules. I locked the car, kept my keys separate from my phone like they tell us in trainings, and did a quick scan out of habit. One buzzing light, a cracked camera dome, a handwritten out-of-order sign on the fountain. The bathroom was fine. I washed up, stretched, and walked to the vending machines thinking I needed caffeine more than sleep. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to know I wasn't being jumpy for nothing. We'd had 2 lockdowns in May because of a stupid prank, and since then I notice exits and hands and where people stand. So when I heard an engine outside, I looked at the window. From there you could see rows of open spaces like a checkerboard with no pieces down yet. While I was inside looking at the vending machine options, I heard another vehicle pull into the parking lot. Through the window, I saw a white pickup parked directly next to my Honda despite the empty lot. Odd, but people park weird. I bought a canned coffee and a bag of chips, then headed out. The truck stayed running with its lights on, and there was a man in a baseball cap and dark jacket watching me instead of the door. I told myself he might need directions or was waiting on someone in the bathroom. I veered to the passenger side to give us space and hit unlock. My lights flashed. His engine revved a little like a tap on the gas. I lifted the coffee as a prop and said, "Bathroom's open if you need it," in that neutral teacher voice I use with angry parents. He didn't answer. He just kept staring like he was timing me. I kept moving like everything was normal because making scenes in empty places at night is how dumb headlines happen. I set the coffee on the roof, reached for the handle, and that's when his door opened and shut, quick, controlled, He didn't head for the building. He walked behind my car and crouched at the bumper, disappearing from view like he'd slipped under a stage. For a second, I couldn't even compute it. Behind my car? For what? I shifted my feet to angle a glance without making it obvious. He was kneeling low, head down, hands busy under the bumper. I heard a faint plasticky sound, like a zip tie, then a tiny click. Not keys, not trash. Deliberate. "You okay?" I asked, mostly to break the silence. No answer. He stood up fast, scanned left and right, met my eyes for half a beat, then walked back to the pickup and got in. He didn't leave. He just idled. Something in me said, "Do not start the car." Another part said, "Don't look rattled." Those two ideas smacked together and left me standing there like a prop. I took the coffee off the roof and set it on the trunk to buy a second. My phone was in my pocket. I opened the camera, flipped on the little light like I was checking for a scratch, and walked casually to the back. The pickup's headlights washed over the bumper. I crouched. Tucked just ahead of the metal lip was a black rectangle about the size of a deck of cards. It was sitting there with two small magnets, not bolted, not factory. A tiny LED the color of a watch face blinked once, then again. My mouth went dry. I didn't touch it. I didn't even breathe for a second, like somehow air would set it off. The truck idled 3 feet away. In his side mirror, I could see the brim of his cap angled toward me. He wanted to see if I'd see it. That's what it felt like. Not random. A test. My brain flipped through the briefings we get. A tracker, a kill switch, something I didn't even know to name. Years of cafeteria duty kept my face flat. I slid a palm under the bumper without touching, just to see how it sat there. Up close, it looked new. Cheap plastic casing, a little SIM slot. Scuff marks showed where the magnets had scraped paint. It didn't belong to me or my car or roadside assistance or any normal reason a stranger would have to crouch behind someone else's vehicle at a rest stop. My chest felt tight, but my hands stayed steady, and I kept my body between the truck and the bumper like a shield, pretending I was reading a scratch report for insurance while counting down numbers to keep from shaking. I stood up slow, phone in my hand, coffee going cold on the trunk, and looked again to be absolutely sure. It was attached under my bumper with magnetic clips. I'd never seen anything like it before, but it was obviously a tracking device, not anything that belonged to my car. I pinched the edge where the magnet didn't fully sit, pulled it off in one motion, and set it on the bumper to take pictures. Front, back, the SIM slot, the blinking LED, the scrape on my paint. Then I walked it to the trash can by the door, lifted the lid, dropped it in, and shut the lid. When I looked up, the guy in the pickup was watching me over the wheel. He wanted me to know he saw me toss it. I didn't stare back. I got in, locked the doors, started the engine, and rolled out like a normal person. In the mirror, his headlights swung around and settled behind me at a steady distance. I tried to be boring. Cruise control, signals. He stayed about a quarter-mile back, then sometimes closed the gap and drifted away, like he was matching me but pretending he wasn't. I took an exit toward a town, looped the clover leaf, and merged right back onto the interstate. He did the same. I moved 2 lanes over to pass nothing. A moment later, he slid over the same 2 lanes. By 10 miles in, I quit pretending it was coincidence. Here's why I didn't brake hard or floor it. Those dashcam clips from trainings end ugly on empty roads. I wanted light and bodies and cameras. So I started reading the blue service signs. Food next 2 miles. Gas next 1 mile. I picked the cluster with the most logos because more logos means more cars. About 20 miles later, a 24-hour diner lit up the side of the highway. The lot looked busy enough. I signaled early, eased down the ramp, and took the turn slow. He followed off the ramp and then hung back at the entrance, idling like he was debating it. I rolled the front row, chose a spot near the door under a camera dome, and parked. I killed the engine, got out with my phone and keys, and held the diner door for a couple coming out so I was standing in the entry light. The pickup crept along the far edge of the lot, paused like he might commit, then kept moving and slipped back toward the on-ramp without stopping. Inside, I took a counter seat with a view of my car. I ordered coffee, checked the photos, and texted my sister my location. I watched the lot through the window for a while. No white pickup, just regular people. I paid, finished the drive to the hotel, slept a few hours, and showed up early to the reunion brunch the next morning. Dave, friend from school, cop back home, was by the coffee, and I handed him my phone. He studied the pictures and said, "Yeah, that's a tracker. Cheap. People stick them on cars and follow you to wherever you sleep or shop." He asked what I'd done with it. I told him about the trash can and the follow in the diner. "You handled it," he said. "Crowds and cameras. Don't lead anybody to your door. If you think you're being followed again, call it in while you head somewhere bright. And try to grab a plate next time without making it a thing." He showed me how he'd angle a phone for a mirror shot to catch a plate without lifting it like a camera. After brunch, I went to the local police station and made a report. I gave them the time, the exits I remembered, and the photos. Without a license plate, the officer said there wasn't much to pursue, but he took the report and said they'd seen more trackers on highways near state lines. He said the same thing Dave did. Stay in the light, stop where there are cameras, trust your read. Now I check under my car before I leave any remote stop. I park near doors and cameras, and if a lot is empty, I keep going, and I try to stop only at major truck stops with good security, every single time now. When I was around 8 years old, I was playing soccer by myself in our front yard, kicking the ball between two trees that I used as goalposts. My parents were inside the house, and I was having fun practicing my moves on the small patch of grass. Our street was usually quiet during the day, with very little traffic, so I felt safe playing outside alone. At some point, I kicked the ball too hard, and it rolled across our driveway toward a neighbor's house, stopping near a van that was parked on the street. I knew my mom always told me not to leave our yard, but the ball was only about 30 feet away and I could see it clearly. I looked back at the house to make sure my parents weren't watching, then ran over to get it. The van hadn't been there earlier, or maybe I just hadn't noticed it, which now bugs me because I usually clocked what cars were on our street. Kid logic, I guess, like knowing which driveways were good for scooter turns. It was a dull blue panel van with those kind of windows you can't really see through. One of the rear lights had a little crack with tape on it, and there was a cheap air freshener hanging on the mirror that didn't match the stale smell when I got close. I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal, just grab the ball and run back. I stayed on the strip of curb like that somehow still counted as our yard. As I bent down to pick up the ball, a man's voice behind me asked if it was mine. I turned around and saw a guy in his 40s wearing jeans and a plaid shirt, standing next to the van I'd noticed earlier. He had a trimmed beard and a baseball cap with a faded logo, and he was smiling in that way adults did when they were trying to be friendly with kids. Hands open, chin lifted, like a coach. I told him yes, it was my ball. He said he had a son about my age and asked if I wanted to play a simple game. If I could hit the back doors of his van with the ball from 10 steps away, he'd give me $5. That sounded like easy money to a kid, enough to buy lots of candy or comic books. The man walked over to his van and opened the rear doors, showing me where to aim. He made a show of it, like he was setting up a carnival game. He flicked the door latch and let the doors swing wide, thumped the right door with his palm and said, "Right here, buddy, dead center." Inside, I just caught a flash of blankets, a cooler, and a cardboard box with a shoe brand on the side. Stuff grown-ups kept when they were hauling things around, I figured. He kept glancing up the street in a quick, twitchy way, then back at me, then at the house. "It's fine," he said, noticing me look over my shoulder. "I'm just killing time between jobs. My kid loves this game." It felt kind of legit, $5 for a throw, except my stomach did that little dip I always got when I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. Still, 10 steps didn't seem far. He paced off 10 steps and told me to try throwing the ball at the target. "Stand right there," he said, planting his shoe like a marker on the pavement, and he grinned in this easy way that made the whole thing feel normal. I took the ball in both hands, too small to palm it, and I lobbed it with everything I had. I missed, and the ball clipped the left door and bounced off to the side with that hollow metal sound. He laughed like this was just part of the fun. He jogged after it, quick, like he'd done this all the time with his kid. He retrieved it and said I had 2 more tries to win the $5. I could hear our dishwasher running through the kitchen window we always left cracked. Tiny details you remember later because they stick for some reason. He squatted and rolled the ball to me, smooth and slow, and kept talking like a salesman. "You almost had it, champ. 2 more. Focus up." I shifted my feet like he told me, heel on the little chalk line from where someone had marked the curb for trash day. I remember that too. He repositioned himself between me and the open doors, not blocking my view, just close enough to feel like he was helping. When I walked closer to get the ball for my second attempt, he suddenly grabbed my arm and tried to pull me toward the open van doors. It was fast and hard, no warm-up. His fingers clamped right above my wrist where there's not much to grab on a kid, and he yanked like he'd done it before. I dropped the ball on reflex and it bounced under the bumper. I started yelling. Not words at first, just that panicked shout kids do when they're hurt or surprised. And I twisted the way our PE teacher showed us for stranger danger. We actually had that. But he was much stronger than me. He was saying, "It's okay, bud. It's okay. I just want to show you something cool." And it was weird how calm his voice was while his hand dug into my arm. He tried to pivot me so I'd stumble up into the van, 1 foot up, then the other, which I guess was the whole point of opening those doors in the first place. Every time I planted a foot, he dragged, and when I twisted free a little, he re-gripped higher, like a wrestler adjusting holds. I screamed, "Mom," then "Dad," then "Help," because that's what you do. Short words, big noise. My sneaker caught on the edge of the bumper and I scraped my shin, which just made me kick harder. He hissed, "Stop it," under his breath, quick and mean, and that was the first time the smile dropped. He looked over my shoulder again, automatic, and I tried to yank in the same moment, but he shifted and used his hip like a door to push me off balance. I remember thinking, stupidly, that his cap smelled like old sweat when he leaned in close. "I just want to show you my son's trophies, okay?" he said, which made no sense, and I yelled "no," loud and long enough that my throat burned. There was this half second where I heard a car somewhere, like a tire hum, and I think he heard it too because his grip tightened, then loosened, tiny changes, but I felt them, and he tried to scoop me, both hands under my arms, to haul me in fast. I went dead weight like my cousin told me to do if anyone ever tried to pick me up, just drop, so I slammed my butt onto the bumper and kicked both heels into the door jamb. He grunted, annoyed now, breath hot, and he switched tactics, yanking my forearm down and twisting, trying to rotate me sideways through the opening. He said, "Don't make a scene," like I was embarrassing him, like this was my fault. My elbow burned and I bit my lip, metal taste, and pushed my back into the door so hard my shoulder blades thudded. The ball rolled out from under the van like it was escaping too. In that mash of motion, I saw inside properly for the first time. No trophies, no kid stuff. Just a folded camping chair, a ratty blanket spread flat, duct tape on a roll, a plastic milk crate with random junk, and a fast food bag crumpled in the corner. The floor mat had dark scuffs where shoes had been grinding in the same spots. I caught that, and then the smell hit me full. Stale fries, sweat, and something sour, like old food or something worse. Fortunately, Mr. Wilson from across the street was working in his garden and heard me screaming. He shouted and ran toward us. The man let go of my arm and slammed the van doors. I sprinted for Mr. Wilson, and he stepped between me and the van. The stranger jumped in, fired the engine, and took off. Mr. Wilson walked me home and told my parents what he'd seen. Mom called the police. I could only give a description of a white van with no windows in the back doors. Dad came out in socks, trying to understand, and Mr. Wilson kept pointing at the street, saying I'd been grabbed. Mom put the dispatcher on speaker, and the questions came in a list. Where it happened, what he looked like, which way he drove. I stuck to short answers because the operator kept me on track. Male, 40s, plaid shirt, cap, beard, tried to pull me. I showed the red mark on my wrist and the scrape on my shin. Nobody asked about the ball. 2 officers arrived within minutes. No siren, steady voices. One took our statements while the other checked the curb for tire marks and looked under parked cars. I walked them to the spot where my heel had been on the chalk by the gutter. They asked me to describe the van again, and I repeated it. White, no back windows. I felt stupid for missing the plate. The older officer said most people miss it and said I did fine. They canvassed the block. Mr. Wilson's wife said she heard me yell twice and then a car peel out. The corner neighbor said a white van had circled earlier, slow. The officer asked about cameras, and back then there weren't many. 1 doorbell camera 2 houses over, wrong angle. Before they left, the older officer explained it straight. Guys test kids with games, money, or fake emergencies, then try to move them fast. He said the man would probably try the same thing nearby. Patrols would swing by, flag vans. That night turned into rules. No playing outside alone. No talking to strangers even if they knew my name. If someone asked for help, I was to get an adult. Dad checked the side gate and the garage door twice. Mom closed the curtains and kept the porch light on. Mr. Wilson stood in his driveway a while like he was daring a van to come back. I realized my soccer ball was gone and didn't ask to look. It felt like a trap outside. Over the next week, patrol cars rolled through more often. An officer stopped by after school to ask if the man had tattoos or a limp. I hadn't seen either. The school sent home a flyer about tricky people, and our principal did a quick talk. If anyone offers money or asks to see a pet, find an adult. Mr. Wilson worked in his yard with no headphones and waved each time. I waved back because he'd truly saved me. A few weeks later, it went quiet again. The patrols eased. My parents kept the rules anyway. If I wanted to kick a ball, we drove to the park and Dad watched from the bleachers. If a van rolled by our street, any van, Mom tracked it until it turned. Mr. Wilson apologized a few times for not moving faster, and Dad told him I was standing here because he did. I didn't play in the front yard alone after that. It wasn't a discussion. It was just how we did things now. Many years later, in high school, I was walking one street over and saw that same man in his yard. I knew his face right away. Older, but the same. Fixed smile and quick scan. He was kneeling by a hedge. I kept moving, noted the house number carefully. At the corner, I called my dad. He said, "Come home and don't loop around." We called the non-emergency line and gave the address and why I recognized him. The officer said they'd send a car, and unless a crime was happening, they could talk only. From our front window, I watched a patrol car cruise that block twice that evening and again the next day. Dad said we'd done what we could. I didn't see the man after that, but sometimes I caught him at the mailbox when we drove by. He never looked our way, We didn't change our route. We just didn't slow down. Looking back, I circle the parts. Mr. Wilson's gloves, the speakerphone questions, the chalk line by the gutter, the way a van vanishes in a turn, and knowing he probably kept trying for years.